Chapter 21, Childhood 20. Thank you. Ishin looked at the old man who had spoken. No problem. That was all Ishin could manage. Seeing Ishin's reaction, Saburo nodded and hefted his hunting rifle off his shoulder. He walked over to Genji, the two of them quietly discussing how to send their old friend off. Mitsuru approached Ishin, kneeling beside him and resting a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Ishin, for helping us with this. Genji and Moryama had grown up in a time where men were expected to bottle up their emotions as the men of the house. Even now it was rare for either of them to openly show grief. Mitsuru didn't want Ishin to mistake that restraint as being ungrateful. But also, Mitsuru continued, softer now, I'd like you to play with Nejire-chan for a while. Shiori had been keeping Nejire occupied up until now, but she deserved to be present for Moryama's send-off. Nejire had known Moryama. She had played with him and laughed with him. But a child should witness a farewell, not a death. Even if the adults hadn't been especially reliable throughout this entire ordeal, every one of them understood that watching the life leave someone's body wasn't healthy for a child. Okay. Ishin didn't hesitate to agree. He didn't want Nejire to see Moryama die either. Ishin turned toward his parents. They exchanged uncertain nods, and Ishin nodded back before heading in the direction Nejire had gone. Resetting his omniscient domain, Ishin quickly located her, and couldn't help a faint, inward huff of amusement at the contrast. When he arrived, he found Nejire asleep in Shiori's arms. Shiori's lecture hadn't lasted long. She didn't have the heart to scold her daughter for trying to save her, because in her own way Nejire had. Instead, Shiori had shifted the topic to Ishin's teleportation. That alone had been more than enough to distract Nejire, who immediately began rattling off theories and possibilities about his quirk. But Nejire had spent most of the search flying and exerting her quirk, right up until Ishin had essentially skipped the entire process. The only thing keeping her awake after that had been pure determination to save her parents. Now that her parents were safe and that motivation was gone, the only thing fueling her was Ishin's new quirk. How could he hide something that cool from me this whole time? Shiori, who could read her daughter like clockwork, gently redirected that curiosity toward Ishin while rocking her and patting her head. The combination worked quickly. By the time Ishin arrived, Nejire was already fast asleep. Shiori noticed Ishin approaching and stood up carefully, Nejire still in her arms. Done, Shunkuen? Ishin nodded and held out his arms. Uncle Mitsuru told me to play with Nejire. Shiori understood immediately. She nodded and gently handed Nejire over. While it was a bit comical watching Ishin putting an effort to hold Nejire, seeing as she was taller than him, the sight still brought a fond smile to Shiori's face. Thank you for taking care of Nejire-chan, Shunkuen. This really doesn't have to be that deep. Ishin kept the thought to himself, glancing at Shiori's expression. Can you get Nejire-chan home? Shiori asked. Ishin nodded, giving a bow and a wave, watching as Shiori made her way back to the group. After making sure, Ishin teleported in the direction of the village, but stopped at the range that the teleportation domain ended. It was better to be safe than sorry. What if somehow the monster escaped and everyone died? Ishin had to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Ironically, the distance meant Ishin could still see Moryama's death, like watching it through a screen. It was more like since he wasn't there and looking at his death, it felt like he was watching it from a detached point of view. Not being physically present made it feel unreal. Since Nejire was too heavy for him to carry for long, Ishin teleported leaves and dirt to make a small, makeshift resting spot. He gently set her down and sat nearby. A lot had happened today. First off, maybe it would be good to actively train my computational abilities. Second, learn anatomy. Ishin had once considered whether teleportation could be used to reassemble a body, but until he learned to precisely focus his omniscient domain, it wasn't feasible. And by the time he was able to focus the omniscient domain, it had already been filed to the back of his mind. If teleportation could kill so easily, who was to say it couldn't save just as effectively? While part of his mind wandered through these thoughts, another stayed alert, constantly monitoring the monster and Moryama. Soon after, a sound could be heard throughout the forest. Bang! The monster's heart was shot. Bang! Moryama's heart was shot. With Genzai's hypercognition and the antenna-like protrusions on Saburo's head, locating vital points had only been a matter of time. Ishin stared into space as he watched the monster's body finally go slack, its violent movements slowing to nothing. Once he confirmed it was dead, he looked down at Nejire, who stirred at the sound of the gunshots. Is that Grandpa Sabaro? She squinted sleepily, then her eyes landed on Ishin. Shunchan? Shunchan? For a split second, her first instinct was to punish the traitor who didn't help her earlier, but curiosity immediately overpowered it. Where's Mom? Is everyone safe? She had to take care of something. But she's safe. That's good. Nejire beamed as she pushed herself upright. This is a successful debut of Blueberry Vanilla. Ishin nodded. Now fully awake and reassured, Nejire stepped closer and planted her hands firmly on Ishin's shoulders, putting on the sternest expression she could manage. You have some things to explain, Shunchan? Yeah. The tracker's broken? All for One's distorted voice carried through the monitor, unhurried. Yes, Master. Experiment number FIDM-17. The doctor in the lab coat, Dr. Garaki, nodded as he adjusted his glasses. The device was destroyed before the specimen's vitals could finish transmitting. All for One's eyes narrowed slightly on the screen. Where was its last recorded location? A mountain in Akita Prefecture. Near a small village. All for One paused. Abandon all experiments and ongoing projects in Akita Prefecture for now. Yes, Master. The doctor agreed without hesitation. Neither of them were foolish. Quirks, by their very nature, were volatile and unpredictable variables. One day there could exist a quirk that had the force of a nuclear warhead in the hands of a child. Even if the chances were low, they were never zero. From the limited information available, specifically, the fact that the vitals and location tracker had been destroyed before the vitals failed, two primary possibilities presented themselves. First, the individual possessed a quirk that ignored distance entirely. Second, they possessed a quirk capable of killing without ever revealing their presence. There were other explanations, of course, but these were the most plausible. Spatial-type quirks were rare and most were unimpressive. But a spatial ability with sufficient precision and output would be effectively unbeatable in a direct one-on-one confrontation. Neither All for One nor Garaki was arrogant enough to antagonize an unknown, unstable variable without proper data. With the Ideo trigger experiments already underway and nearly finished, and a final confrontation with All Might looming, it was simply more efficient to cut their losses. Akita Prefecture was, after all, a backwater. Chapter 22, Childhood Epilogue. Moryama had a quiet funeral, attended by almost everyone in the village. With the average age of the villagers being in their 50s and above, his passing, while mourned, felt more like an extension of an inevitability they had all learned to accept. Explaining Moryama's death to Nejire had been uncomfortable. Trying to phrase it as him having gone to a faraway place he wouldn't be returning from only went so far, but thankfully her parents had already sat her down and talked to her about separation in their own way. While Nejire seemed to understand, or at least looked like she did, being so young, the meaning of an indefinite parting wasn't fully registered in her head. Not long after the funeral, she returned to her usual self. Loss was painful, but time really was the best healer. After all, summer vacation had only just begun. Nejire had followed through with her inner promise, not giving Ishin a single chance to rest. Every morning, before Ishin could even properly register that it was daytime, Nejire, who seemed to have an internal clock far more reliable than any average college student's, would shake him awake with limitless energy. Unfortunately, Ishin could almost never get a good night's sleep. With the unexpected guests staying over at the Hado household, there simply weren't enough rooms. The house only had 3 bedrooms and a single guest room. While the Shunkan family had been perfectly fine with all 3 of them sharing one room, Nejire had firmly and loudly disagreed. In the end, entirely due to Nejire's insistence, she and Ishin ended up sleeping in the same guest room. Which meant Ishin had to endure her rather unfortunate sleeping habits. Waking up in the middle of the night without a single blanket, despite them sleeping on completely separate futons, was only the beginning. On another night he found himself actively suffocating, Nejire having somehow twisted herself into a loose chokehold in her sleep. That had been his final straw. I refuse to sleep with that woman any longer. Ishin complained to Keiko while she and Genzai helped Shirori prepare breakfast. Keiko merely looked at him with amusement, casually handing a washed bell pepper to Genzai to cut. Why not? She asked, smiling. Ishin raised an eyebrow, utterly incredulous. Why not? Just look at the past few days, he protested. I wake up with no blankets and this morning I almost died from being strangled in my sleep. Keiko and Genzai both chuckled and Genzai shrugged. Shunkuin, can't you be the bigger person? Bigger person? Ishin echoed flatly. No. Nejire is obviously the bigger person. Maybe a little too big. He gestured with his eyes toward the living room. Nejire was sitting in front of the TV, completely engrossed in a local hero versus villain battle taking place in Akita City. She was happily munching on the strawberries Shirori had set out, her cheeks puffed out as she ate. As if she could feel Ishin looking at her, Nejire turned and met his gaze, immediately lighting up. She waved enthusiastically and patted the spot beside her. Ishin's expression settled into a grimace. He'd only managed to escape earlier by claiming he needed to use the restroom, using the opportunity to complain to Keiko instead. See, he said. That earned him nothing but fond smiles from the adults in the kitchen. Why is it that every time I try to complain I get that look? Ishin thought irritably. Well, don't worry too much, Shunkuin, Shirori chuckled, placing another bowl of strawberries into his hands. Maybe Nejire-chan's just excited that she gets to play with you all day. She'll probably calm down soon. Is that so? Ishin didn't get the chance to say anything else before Nejire grabbed his wrist and dragged him back to the TV. He gave up almost immediately. Thankfully, Shirori turned out to be right. Even a hyperactive child like Nejire couldn't go plus ultra for weeks on end. So instead of constantly running around the village, Ishin and Nejire spent the rest of their days helping the Hado family with their strawberry fields and other farms in the village. With his teleportation quirk, Ishin was greatly appreciated throughout the village, a fact that didn't surprise him in the slightest. By the time summer break ended, the Shunkan family returned home with enough strawberries and vegetables to last them quite a while. After that summer break, nothing particularly important happened. Elementary school was as boring as ever. If anything had changed, it was Ishin himself. He began experimenting with different ways to increase his computational abilities, pushing his mind the same way others trained their quirks. Instead of letting his computational ability passively grow, maybe actively utilizing his computational abilities would help in increasing his computational abilities. He studied new languages while solving advanced math problems, all while memorizing human anatomy, forcing his brain to multitask under constant strain. Still, for a long time life remained uneventful. If there was one notable discovery, it was that Ishin could artificially increase the effective distance of both his teleportation and omniscient domain. For context, both Ishin's and Genzai's bodies were built differently from most people's. Enhanced senses meant denser, more numerous nerves throughout their bodies. One side effect of this was slow hair growth. Extremely slow. His hair never shed either. Ishin hadn't actually noticed this until Genzai pointed it out. Lacking confidence in choosing a hairstyle, Ishin hadn't cut a single strand of hair since he was born, and even then it only reached his armpits. He had already decided that he wouldn't touch it unless he was 100% sure he wouldn't regret it. Unfortunately, Ishin had a devil's advocate for a friend. After hearing him complain several times about his bangs blocking his vision, Nejire enthusiastically volunteered to cut them for him. Well, the rest was history. Surprisingly, it didn't look half bad. Unfortunately, both of them were scolded by both sets of parents that day. Ishin, thinking it would be a waste to throw away hair that took forever to grow, stuffed it into a plastic bag. Imagine his surprise when he went to school the next day and instinctively knew where that bag was and the area around that bag. After some experimentation, Ishin realized that if enough of his DNA was concentrated in one location, it acted like a marker, kind of like a small omniscient domain separate from the one centered on himself. That discovery surprised him, but it was a pleasant one. The radius of the smaller domain was only about 2 meters, but it was enough to bypass the distance limit of his teleportation. Still, as interesting as it was, Ishin couldn't be bothered to investigate further if it meant cutting more of his hair. Lying down on his bed after deciding to revisit the issue only once he settled on a proper hairstyle, he sighed, then immediately sat back up. When he opened the curtains, instead of the usual bright, energetic face of Nejire, he was met with something different. She looked sad. Nejire accurately tossed the blueberry vanilla phone MK.109 into Ishin's hands, 3 years of experience showing in the throw. When Ishin raised the cup to his ear, an uncharacteristically quiet voice came through. Shunchan, Nejire said softly. I think I might be moving away when I graduate. Chapter 23, Interlude, Hado Nejire. Hado Nejire was the darling of her hometown. Well, she was the only child in her hometown, so there wasn't much competition in the first place. Still, life as the only child in a small village wasn't bad. With her ever-energetic personality and constant eagerness to help, Nejire was doted on by everyone around her. So while she was sad about moving, especially since the reason was Mitsuru getting a job in the city, all the way in Tokyo Prefecture, the very next thought that popped into her head was, the city. That meant kids her age. Friends her age. Overflowing with curiosity about city life and new people, Nejire arrived in the neighborhood practically vibrating with excitement, ready to make friends the moment they finished moving in. Almost immediately, she rushed over to greet the neighbors and rang the doorbell of the house next door. Silence. Maybe no one's home, she thought. But the house's architecture was different from hers, more city-like, and that alone was enough to keep her interest. Even without an answer, Nejire's curiosity got the better of her. Using her quirk to boost herself upward, she bounced lightly along the side of the house until she found a window that wasn't blocked by curtains. Curiosity 1. I'll just take a quick look. She wasn't great at flying yet, but she could hover well enough. Carefully wobbling into place, she steadied herself and peeked inside. Someone's inside? Inside was a child around her age. The first thing Nejire noticed was their shoulder-length, messy, vanilla-colored hair. Her hair looks kind of tasty. Having barely interacted with kids her own age before, Nejire worked off some very simple assumptions. Long hair meant girl, short hair meant boy. It was the same way she'd once thought everyone's parents were just called mom and dad, and all grandparents were grandpa and grandma. Why didn't she answer the door? Nejire wondered. Oh, maybe they just didn't hear it. That line of thinking made sense. What didn't make sense was what she did next. She knocked loudly on the window. Inside, the child turned around, startled, and locked eyes with her. Wow, she's pretty. The child's white gold soft eyes and long eyelashes immediately reinforced Nejire's assumption that this was definitely a girl. We already have so much in common. Her desire to talk to them skyrocketed. Balancing herself against the wall, Nejire waved enthusiastically whenever she didn't need to focus on not falling. After a moment of hesitation, the vanilla-haired child awkwardly waved back. A few seconds later, the child placed a cushion on the floor beneath the window and opened it, clearly inviting her inside. When Nejire heard the child speak, his voice flat and deadpan, her assumptions shattered instantly. So it was a boy. Are all city people's genders this confusing? She didn't say that out loud, of course. Instead, realizing her first thing in common had been completely wrong, Nejire did what came naturally to her. She decided she just needed to learn more and find new things they shared. And that was how Hado Nejire met Shunkan Ishin. After that first meeting, Nejire was perfectly satisfied with just this one friend. He knew everything. Anything Nejire asked, whether it was about food, quirks, or even homework, Ishin always had an answer. Not always enthusiastically and not always nicely, but always somewhat accurately. He played with her. He accompanied her. He helped her sometimes. Ishin was a kind person. Even if he wasn't always a nice person. He knew when Nejire was curious. He knew when she was bored. He knew when to step in and help, often before she even asked. Ishin was her quintessential partner. She had friends at school, but being around them felt different. Like they were being nice to her instead of being nice with her. Even if it wasn't fair to expect children to be socially aware, Nejire could subconsciously tell the difference between how Ishin treated her and how her classmates did. They were the blueberry vanilla duo for a reason. With the exception of her parents, Ishin was her number one. Grandpa Moryama had suddenly gone to a faraway place. Was what her mom had told her. That was the first time Nejire learned that people could leave without saying goodbye. When is he coming back? Nejire asked. Shiori could only answer with a somewhat forced smile. Nejire-chan, he's not coming back. Why? She had asked. Because, Mitsuru said gently, placing a hand on Nejire's shoulder, he had to go get something precious. Will I ever play with Grandpa Moryama again? Yes, Mitsuru said after a pause, smiling. You'll play with him again. How long do I have to wait? Nejire wondered aloud. She hoped it wouldn't be long. A long time. A long time? How long is that? Nejire wondered. How long? A long time. I hope I don't have to wait too long. While it was disappointing that Grandpa Moryama had gone so far away so suddenly, there wasn't much she could do about it. Maybe if she got strong enough, she could go wherever he was faster. But the sudden farewell planted a stray thought in her head. If Grandpa Moryama left so suddenly, what's stopping Shunchan from leaving suddenly too? Shunchan was her partner. If he went somewhere, she had to follow. To prevent Ishin from disappearing without her knowing, it was best if she could keep an eye on him at all times. After she reassured herself that Ishin wasn't going to vanish like Grandpa Moryama, life returned to normal. Then one day, during a rare outing with just her parents, they broke the news. Nejire-chan, you know how I work for a company? MHA, she replied, happily chewing on her favorite hamburger steak. Mitsuru hesitated. He knew how attached she was to Ishin. He'd even found himself looking forward to their future together. Being the reason she'd have to separate from him, Mitsuru couldn't help but pause. But Shiori didn't let the moment drag on. Nejire-chan, sweetie, we're moving. Moving? Nejire tilted her head. Are we moving the furniture again? No, Shiori said gently. We're moving away from the neighborhood. Huh? Chapter 24, Pre-Adolescence Prologue. I think I might be moving away when I graduate. That was enough to make Ishin raise an eyebrow. Nejire's moving away? There was a faint sense of loss, but moving away was just a part of life, something Ishin was already familiar with. Wait, why is she so sad about it? So where are you moving? Ishin asked. You're not sad. Even if Nejire and Ishin were practically inseparable, knowing that her number one didn't look sad about her leaving was enough to sting. Her voice wavered just slightly. At her tone, one that clearly was a warning sign she'd spiral further if he didn't explain, Ishin quickly added. Wait, I am sad, but I obviously need more information. Ishin said through the cup. And also, did you just forget my ability? The moment he finished speaking, Ishin teleported, along with the entire cup phone, onto the windowsill. He looked down at Nejire, both cups now in his hands, her eyes glossy with tears. Nejire blinked up at him in surprise. Ishin sighed, teleporting a tissue into his hand and gently wiping away the tears clinging to her cheeks. Seeing his unmistakable "what am I going to do with you" expression, Nejire felt her face heat up, a small blush creeping across her cheeks. Hey, she offered weakly, then paused. Wait, but you almost never use it publicly. It's totally normal that I forgot, right? She complained loudly. That's not even a valid argument, Ishin replied flatly. I've shown you this for like the past 3 years. That shut her up immediately. Her sadness was quickly buried under embarrassment. Thankfully, Ishin wasn't foolish enough to let the silence fester. So, he prompted, where are you moving? Nejire sniffled, whatever tears remained making it hard for her to speak clearly. Without missing a beat, Ishin teleported another tissue and held it up to her nose. Blow into it. I'm not a child. Nejire protested, but she did it anyway. After getting the snot out and teleporting it into the trash can, Ishin looked at Nejire, waiting for a response. I don't know. Now that she really thought about it, her parents hadn't given her any details. Just knowing she'd be moving away from Ishin had been more than enough to upset her. Are you serious? Ishin muttered, slapping his forehead. My mom only told me we're moving when I graduate. Nejire shot back. How was I supposed to know more if she didn't tell me? So you didn't bother asking, Ishin said slowly. That silenced Nejire. I'll be right back, Shunchan. Nejire chose the wisest option available, retreating from a losing argument. As she bolted out of the room, Ishin glanced around, his thoughts drifting. He was very familiar with the layout of Nejire's room. Mostly because she'd complained more than once about why they always hung out in his room when hers was an option too. Her room was surprisingly neat, almost sparse for someone with Nejire's personality. Her bookshelf held a few elementary-level textbooks from school, alongside several art books. Those had started appearing after she realized Ishin's cup designs were far better than hers. Once she'd discovered she enjoyed art more than expected, she'd gone all in, buying supplies whenever she could.
Whoa. Hold up. Stop for a sec. Look, if you've already made it this far into the video and you're still here, Come on, subscribe, bro. Help a brother out, man. It's one tiny click for you, but it's a massive, and I mean massive, heck yeah for me. Plus, it keeps the algorithm from thinking I'm boring, and we both know that's a total lie. All right. I'm done. I'll get out of the way now so you can get back to the good stuff. Stick around and finish listening. It's worth it. Peace.
Ishin found himself at a very artistic time in his life, which, in his case, meant he was taking a break from learning new languages. Ishin could probably get certified as a plumber, electrician, carpenter, or even a cybersecurity specialist if he really wanted to. In fact, he had earned plenty of online certificates, anywhere he could find them. Collecting them had become something like a game. Most of them relied more on memorization than true mastery, but still. Next to the books was a display shelf lined with all the cups they'd exchanged over the years. Small notes were placed beneath the more meaningful ones. First exchanged cup. First-year anniversary cup. And so on. Ishin's own collection was organized the same way, so he couldn't exactly judge. Her bed was covered with a custom blanket he'd made for her 10th birthday after learning how to sew. The underside was patterned like a waffle cone, while the top was a soft vanilla color dotted with blueberry accents. Ishin couldn't be bothered to make a small blanket just for her to outgrow it, so it looked almost comically large compared to the bed. In the corner was a big plushie he made for her 11th birthday, which was just another rendition of a blueberry vanilla ice cream, but instead of it just being vanilla topped with blueberries, it was a mix of vanilla colors and blueberry colors, topped with blueberries. Nearby were several dolls she'd received from her friends at school, or so she liked to brag. Ishin couldn't say much. The only person who ever really spoke to him was Tokage Setsuna, and that was mostly because she'd been class representative for what felt like 3 years straight. Ishin's rather quiet personality seemed to not mesh with his classmates that well, and Ishin didn't bother actively trying to make any friends either. Grinding certificates was far more efficient than making friends. Friends only slowed down his grinding speed. There were occasional moments when he got dragged into boy talk against his will, fantasizing and speculation that made his skin crawl. He felt no attraction to kids whatsoever, so his only response was a blunt, "I don't know." That answer never satisfied anyone, but Ishin wasn't interested in humoring them. The only reason that Ishin wasn't even made fun of or actively bullied were 2 reasons. 1, he was a little too beautiful, so there was naturally a decent amount of bad attention if someone did. 2, he wouldn't bother entertaining them if they did. If there wasn't a satisfying enough reaction for some kids, there was no reason to interact with what they considered an emotional rock. After a few minutes, Nejire burst back into the room, confidence radiating from her. It had taken her a while to memorize the name of the place, which explained the delay, but now she was beaming. "I found out where we're going," she announced, planting her hands on her hips. All traces of sadness were gone. "So?" Ishin asked. "Where are you moving?" "Musua." She froze. Oh no. She forgot it already. "I'll be right back." Her confidence immediately crumbled as she darted back toward the door. "Muzutafu?" Ishin offered. "Yeah, that one." Nejire nodded enthusiastically. Ishin nodded in return. "That's pretty far. It's a different prefecture too." They currently lived in Saitama, still within the greater Tokyo area. Muzutafu, located in Shizuoka, was far southwest by comparison. Ishin only remembered it clearly because UA High School was located there. With Ishin confirming the distance, Nejire's confidence wavered again. "Does that mean you won't be able to come see me?" "Well, no." Ishin was still smaller than Nejire, so he had to reach up, but he still ruffled Nejire's hair. "Really? I've never seen you teleport that far before." "Well, that's because I technically can't," Ishin inwardly thought. But with what he'd recently discovered about his hair. Just look forward to your graduation gift. Chapter 25, Pre-Adolescence 1. Not long after Nejire's announcement, Ishin found himself sitting in front of both of his parents. Am I about to get the birds and the bees talk? That was, unfortunately, his first thought. Keiko opened her mouth first. Shunkuin. Yeah? Ishin replied, glancing between them. Did he do something wrong? Are you aware that Nejire-chan is moving away after she graduates? Yeah? Keiko first glanced at Genzai with a smug expression, like she won a bet, but quickly turned back to Ishin. Well, after Nejire-chan moves, we'll be moving too. What the? That was awfully convenient. But not to Mizuta-fu like Nejire-chan, Keiko clarified. I actually received a promotion a while back. The company wants me to head a new branch office in central Tokyo. She folded her arms lightly. I could refuse it or delay it, but honestly, the main reason we stayed here this long was because of our friendship with the Hado family. So, Ishin said, flattening it down to its simplest form, since Nejire's moving, we're moving too. Keiko nodded. Okay? Ishin shrugged. I don't really know what you want me to say. We just wanted to let you know ahead of time, Genzai added. So you'd have time to tell your friends at school. I don't have any friends, Ishin thought flatly, but obviously that wasn't something he was going to say out loud. Well, okay, he said instead, giving a short nod. Truthfully, Ishin didn't feel much attachment to the school. With no close friends, there wasn't anyone he felt the need to say goodbye to. If anything, he was just relieved they weren't moving in the middle of the school year, as transfer student nonsense was a headache he didn't want to deal with. After getting the specifics from his parents, unlike Nejire, Ishin promptly told Nejire the news that night. For a brief moment, Nejire's eyes lit up when she heard that Ishin would be moving too, her posture straightening with excitement. But the moment he explained where, her shoulders sagged. Tokyo, she repeated quietly. Ishin had multiple ideas for Nejire's graduation gift. For one thing, just based on Nejire's personality, she would probably prefer it if the two of them matched in some way. Even though Ishin had reassured her more than once that they would still be able to meet after graduation, the fact that their time as neighbors was steadily ticking down, second by second, still weighed on Nejire. It made her nervous in a way she didn't quite know how to explain. With some enthusiastic recommendations from her friends at school, one particular concept started gaining traction, something that could keep Nejire spiritually connected to Ishin. Or at least that was how they put it. As a result, Nejire had recently become enamored with the idea of matching jewelry. That much became obvious one day when after school ended, Nejire came after her home economics class, proudly holding up a pair of handmade friendship bracelets and talking a mile a minute about how cute matching accessories were. The knowing looks Ishin got from his mother that day were irritating, but they also gave him an idea. After asking Shirori for some of Nejire's hair, which was an awkward conversation for everyone involved, Ishin got to work. He taught himself the basics of CAD software, consulted his parents for their opinions, and managed to put together a rough prototype surprisingly quickly. As for the actual string of the piece, the solution was simpler than expected. Using his hair in its raw state felt unsettling even to him, so instead he fused it through his teleportation quirk, thickening it into something closer to a durable cord rather than something thin and stringy. Once his hair had been condensed down to roughly the width of a thick guitar string, and after confirming that it still counted as sufficient DNA to maintain a Nejire-sized domain, Ishin nodded to himself, satisfied. He'd put more thought into this gift than he probably realized. First, it had to be growth-resistant. He didn't want to waste time modifying it later just because Nejire grew or changed. Second, it couldn't be something that might accidentally fall off. And lastly, it couldn't inconvenience her during hero work or daily life. After weighing all of that, Ishin settled on a necklace. It was simple in looks, secure and practical all in one. And most importantly, something that Nejire could keep close to her. A week before Nejire's graduation. This was Ishin's first time actually wearing his own set, and he couldn't help but scrutinize it. This necklace looks like I put way too much effort into it. He held it up to the light, watching it reflect off the yellow gemstone set into the cup-shaped charm. The one meant for Nejire had a blue gemstone in the same style of setting. Even though his family was solidly upper-middle class, Ishin had never been someone who liked spending money unless it was on food. For the gemstones, he'd simply bought cheap, uncut ones and shaped them himself using teleportation before placing them directly into the charm. The charm itself was silver, but even that had been done by cheating, using small amounts of sterling silver bought separately and then fused together with teleportation. All things considered, he'd spent less than $30 on the entire graduation gift. All hail teleportation. And yet, staring at the finished necklace, Ishin couldn't shake the feeling that it still looked excessive. Maybe I should get a second opinion. He headed downstairs, where Keiko was sitting in the living room with her laptop open. Mom. Keiko glanced up from the screen. Ishin sat down beside her on the couch and pulled out both necklaces and handed them over. Wow, the quality on this, Keiko thought immediately as she felt the cord and examined the silver charm. Nejire-chan is so spoil. What a lucky girl. But when she looked up and noticed Ishin's genuinely worried expression, she frowned slightly and glanced back down at the necklaces. Is something wrong with them? She wondered, inspecting them more carefully. They looked perfectly fine, even better than fine, honestly. Like most things Ishin made. Don't you think this looks way too overboard? Ishin asked. Keiko raised an eyebrow. Is that really what you're worried about? She said, incredulous. No, look, Ishin continued, gesturing at the charm. Doesn't it look really expensive? Maybe I should just take the charm out, he muttered, already thinking through revisions. I mean, I kind of agree, Keiko thought, but compare this to your past birthday presents for Nejire-chan and tell me if this is where you draw the line. She wisely kept that to herself. Shunkuin. Do you think Nejire-chan would be happy with this? She'd be happy with whatever I give her, Ishin replied honestly. But yeah, she would. And you still wonder why I ship you too, Keiko sighed internally. Such an unfairly wholesome relationship. Then what's the problem? She asked gently. Ishin paused, then nodded to himself. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Thanks, Mom. Keiko smiled and closed her laptop. That's only natural. Nejire's graduation ended anticlimactically. Well, it was only elementary school. After the ceremony, the Hado and Shunkan families celebrated with a group dinner. Even though they did that multiple times a week anyway. Once the Hados had left, Nejire rushed to her room, already eager to call Ishin. After all, Shunchan had told her to look forward to her graduation gift, but every time she asked during the day, he just said after dinner. Now that dinner was over, her anticipation was at an all-time high. She opened her window, letting in the cool spring air, and spotted Ishin in his room already, holding a small box. At his signal, Nejire stepped back as Ishin teleported onto the windowsill. What's my graduation gift, Shunchan? She asked brightly. Ishin handed her the wrapped box. Nejire tore it open, revealing a necklace. How pretty. The braided cord intertwined vanilla and periwinkle. The cup-shaped charm held a blue gemstone where liquid might have been. As Nejire looked closer, her eyes widened. Ah! She gasped with realization. She glanced at her bookshelf, at the very first cup phone they'd ever exchanged. The drawings and the engraving were the same. How did Shunchan even? She turned back to Ishin, who leaned against the window with an amused look. Shunchan? Yeah. Thank you. She rushed forward and wrapped him in a tight hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Nejire repeated, emotion in her voice, her hug getting tighter. Thank you so much, Shunchan, Nejire mumbled. Whoa, don't get too excited, Ishin huffed, smiling despite himself. It was always nice to see someone appreciate your gift. After a moment she pulled back, still clutching the necklace. Can you put it on for me? Sure. Taking the necklace from Nejire's hands and putting it around her, Nejire just belatedly noticed that on Ishin's neck was a similar necklace. We're matching. Yep. Ishin nodded, finishing putting on Nejire's necklace. Ishin backed up and looked at Nejire, who walked up to the mirror to see how it looked on her with satisfaction. As expected of me. But that isn't all, Ishin started, getting the attention of Nejire, who was still admiring the necklace. That's not all? Nejire looked at Ishin in surprise. There was more? Well, it's just a feature of the necklace, Ishin clarified. Not a new present. Oh, don't be so disappointed yet. Ishin shook his head in amusement at Nejire's changing expressions. If you call my name or need my help, I'll be there. That got Nejire to pause, registering what Ishin said. Really? She asked hopefully. Really? Really, really? Yes, really, really. Real. If you say it one more time, I'm taking it back. She immediately shut up, then hugged him again, relief washing over her. Thank you, Shunchan. Chapter 26, Pre-Adolescence 2. Ishin had created a new set of formulas specifically for Nejire's necklace. The omniscient domain generated through accumulated DNA didn't fade the way the one originating directly from Ishin did. Within a 2-meter radius of the necklace, Ishin could detect everything inside that space. Beyond those 2 meters, however, his perception cut off completely. While Ishin had given the necklace to Nejire both for protection and as a way to call him, that didn't mean he wanted to be monitoring her constantly. That would just be an invasion of privacy. So instead, Ishin built in a trigger. The formulas would only activate if something moved into that space. Even then, he would only check on the necklace when that condition was met. If nothing entered the range, he wouldn't pay attention to it at all. As for Nejire calling him, if someone was loud enough within that radius, Ishin could hear it. That was more than sufficient. Not even a full day after graduation, the Hado family made their way to Muzutafu. Ishin, meanwhile, would be heading to Tokyo by tomorrow. 2 hours after saying goodbye to Nejire at the station, Ishin was helping Genzai pack up the house, mostly because he'd finished packing his own things in about 5 minutes. He had essentially done the job of a moving company, condensing the entirety of the house into neatly packed, secured boxes. "Thank you, Shunkuin. You'll get double your allowance this week," Genzai said, nodding approvingly as he surveyed the packed house. "Nice," Ishin replied, equally satisfied. Before he could add anything else, a familiar voice echoed inside his head. "Shunchuan?" Ishin tilted his head, confused. He set a box down and made sure there was enough hair on it to serve as a teleport waypoint. It wouldn't do to forget anchoring his original location. He glanced at Genzai, the only other person home since Keiko was off signing what she described as a bajillion moving papers for their new Tokyo apartment. "I'll be right back." Before Genzai could respond, Ishin teleported away. He reappeared in a bare room filled wall-to-wall with boxes. Ishin barely finished scanning the area before something slammed into him. "It really works," Nejire exclaimed, glomping onto him in an enthusiastic hug. Keeping himself steady to prevent himself from falling over, Ishin looked at Nejire with an exasperated expression. "Is that really what you called me here for?" Nejire released him and shook her head quickly. "Nope. Wanna have a house tour? Isn't your house basically empty?" Ishin thought, but he nodded anyway. "Sure." Nejire grabbed his hand and dragged him out of her second-floor room, proudly pointing out the master bedroom before bounding downstairs. In the living room, Shiori and Mitsuru were still talking with the movers about furniture placement. They looked up when Nejire and Ishin came down the stairs. Mitsuru raised an eyebrow in confusion. "Shunkuin? How are you?" He trailed off, but just decided not to think about it further, just attributing it to Ishin's teleportation abilities. Shiori, on the other hand, immediately squished Nejire's cheeks. "Couldn't you wait until we were done moving in before inviting Shunkuin over, Nejire-chan?" she said, half exasperated, half amused. Hey, Nejire mumbled, clearly embarrassed now that she was really looking around at all the boxes. "Do you need help, Auntie?" Ishin asked. "I could probably." Shiori shook her head and smiled, pressing 2 5,000 yen bills into their hands. "Leave this to the adults. We can't be lazy at our age after all," she joked, gently ushering them toward the door. "Go explore the neighborhood." That immediately lit Nejire up. "Okay. Just be back before dinner, all right?" Both kids nodded. Ishin quickly texted his parents to let them know he'd be out with Nejire, then turned his phone off. "So," Nejire beamed. "Where should we go first, Shunchan? Did you eat lunch yet?" She shook her head. "Just a snack on the Shinkansen." "There's a snack market nearby," Ishin said. "I'm pretty sure." After 3 years, Ishin's original range had grown exponentially. Ishin attributed it to constantly using his brain power, but who knew what the real reason behind it was? At baseline, his omniscient domain now had a radius of 2 kilometers. That was what 3 years of non-stop use had earned him. If he pushed himself and focused solely on distance, his theoretical maximum stretched to 4 kilometers. So locating nearby convenience stores, restaurants, and public bathrooms was effortless. Unfortunately, so was noticing a mugging happening in an abandoned alley roughly 973 meters southeast. This neighborhood is more dangerous than I thought. A mugging in broad daylight was absurd to Ishin. In his own neighborhood, there hadn't been any criminal activity within his range at all. With a single thought, he intervened. The mugger abruptly vanished. While obviously Ishin didn't kill him, the mugger's body was essentially buried underground, with only his head poking out. Ishin could have done far worse. He could have obviously fused the concrete with the mugger, which would have resulted in a rather painful degloving experience, but, he was just in a rather nice mood today. She had been supposed to be an easy target, entering an abandoned alley with nothing but a hand purse. He'd been born with the perfect quirk for intimidation. Blade body. Any limb on his body could be reshaped into a blade. While he didn't have the guts to actually murder someone, mugging through intimidation was something he could easily do. After all, it was easy money. The mugging went smoothly as it should have been. While her immediately bursting into tears was a little annoying, it only made it easier for him. Yet the moment he was about to snatch her wallet out of her shaking hands, his perspective changed. What? He couldn't move. When his vision settled, he saw the woman standing far above him. Why is she so tall now? He tried to move, but his body refused to respond. Looking down, all he could see was concrete. He tensed his muscles, trying to move, but nothing changed. A sense of claustrophobia creeped up on him. Panic set in. The woman stumbled backward, eyes wide, before bolting from the alley without looking back. "Hey!" he shouted, forcing his voice deep, threatening. "Call for help." Yet as if she hadn't heard, she quickly ran away from the alley, ignoring his pleading yells. "Hey!" He could only watch as the woman left. He tried activating his quirk and tried reshaping himself to make himself thinner, but nothing worked. He was completely stuck. Am I stuck like this forever? Help. Chapter 27, Pre-Adolescence 3. Life before the new school year started went by relatively smoothly. Well, there were only 2 weeks of break before school resumed, but as far as things went, it was about as chill as it could get. Ishin's new neighbors in the recently moved into apartment building were mostly old couples. The people living above them were a family with a kid already in college. So realistically, Ishin's only real concern, which was the neighbors upstairs being loud, was already settled. Additionally, during those 2 weeks, it felt like Ishin barely had time to stay home at all. Nejire called him every single day. After setting a minimum call time to prevent Nejire from waking him up way too early in the morning, Ishin finally put his attention toward what he internally dubbed the Nejire neighborhood purging plan. Well, after some thought, simply putting criminals straight into the ground felt a little too inefficient. For hidden crimes like muggings, Ishin set a routine. Teleport a random officer's handcuffs directly onto the mugger's wrists, then send both the victim and the villain straight to the nearest police station. For the public acts of villainy like bank robberies, Ishin simply teleported them stuck into the ground, their heads popped out in view of the public. Of course, there was the philosophical argument of, if you stop a crime before it's fully committed, does the perpetrator still get charged? But even if they were eventually released, they would still remember the experience of being utterly powerless. After all, no matter how perfect Ishin's protection could be, only Nejire wore the necklace. And obviously, Ishin wasn't about to let Shirori or Mitsuru live in a neighborhood like that. So, as the friendly neighborhood teleporter, Ishin took it upon himself to make Nejire's area just a little less dangerous. As for being afraid of getting caught, that was basically impossible. Teleportation was the complete opposite of flashy. Its only defining feature was its perfection. Not to brag, of course. Ishin might come off as lazy and goalless, but that didn't mean he didn't enjoy a little aura farming. After all, wasn't that the peak of life? "Shunchan, does this look good on me?" Nejire asked, twirling around in her brand-new middle school sailor uniform. Yeah. Just yesterday she had been showing off her new twin spiral hairstyle. Today it was the uniform. Couldn't she have shown both at the same time? That didn't sound sincere at all. Nejire pouted. "Well, unless you wore a literal trash bag," Ishin replied flatly, "you'd probably look okay in anything." "Is that a challenge?" Nejire asked, eyes lighting up with curiosity. "Where did you even get that idea?" Ishin sighed, rubbing his temples. "So, would you say you're ready for middle school?" "Of course." Nejire nodded confidently, hands on her hips. "I'm gonna make so many friends. So you have to make some too, okay?" Yeah. Muzutafu Police Force East Precinct. Any leads? None. Bang. Damn it. The police major slammed his hand down on the meeting room table. 2 weeks. It had been 2 weeks since a new vigilante appeared in East Muzutafu. And in that short span of time, the number of villains captured in their jurisdiction had reached an absurd level. 300. 300 villains, all apprehended in just 2 weeks. Worse still, it was as if the vigilante was clocking into a 9-to-6 job. After capturing an average of 2 villains per hour throughout the day, nothing. As soon as the workday ended, they stopped. Not only that, but Blink, as the precinct had codenamed them, had also prevented over 20 traffic accidents and passively protected more than 100 civilians. People who were about to fall, collide with something, or otherwise get hurt were saved without even realizing it. Blink seemingly covered the entire jurisdiction and then some. After all, if you blinked, you wouldn't even realize anything had happened. Their efficiency was peerless. And it only highlighted how incompetent both the precinct and the area's heroes looked by comparison. Before anyone could even finish calling a hero, the incident was already over. Recently, some heroes had even started complaining that they didn't have enough work. Yet, as soon as the clock hit 6, as if Blink was Cinderella, they stopped capturing villains. As a result, villains who quickly got the memo had started their crimes at night. That led to a surge in complaints from heroes forced to take more night shifts, and the increased danger only worsened conditions for heroes whose quirks weren't suited for low visibility. So while the city was nearly spotless during the day, nightfall only made things more dangerous. Having heroes take constant night shifts wasn't viable either. Which meant one thing. This law-breaking vigilante had to be caught. However, there was one glaring issue. Blink possessed a spatial-type quirk. Not only was it a normal spatial-type quirk, but it was instant, hence the codename. With no visible drawbacks and no detectable traces, the precinct had no idea where to even begin. The only information they had was the codename itself. The profile folder for Blink contained a blank photo and a single note. Active from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. That was it. How were they supposed to work with that? It was like chasing a ghost. Undetectable, unseeable, and untrackable. And yet, the police major was constantly being hounded by higher-ups demanding updates. He had nothing to give them. Let's see you try to catch this guy. They'd even brought in tracking-type heroes to analyze the villains Blink captured, but there was nothing. No new scent, no residue, nothing. Nada. It was enough to give him a migraine. At this point, the major was half considering waiting until the main police force finally realized how futile the chase was. UA High was also located in Mizudafu. Maybe they could enlist some help. After all, he'd heard UA's principal was a pro-hero with an intelligence-type quirk. And right now, without any leads, just going off of conjectures was their best bet. Chapter 28, Pre-Adolescence 4. Why is this bullshit a thing? That was Ishin's train of thought as he waited for the homeroom teacher to introduce him and another transfer student. Apparently, the school Keiko had enrolled him in didn't rotate students between classes every year and kept the same homeroom teacher for all 6 years of elementary school. Unfortunately, that meant the cliché transfer student introduction Ishin despised was about to happen. If there was a silver lining, it was that he wasn't the only transfer student. Ishin had heard, eavesdropped, that the class Ishin was transferring into had a few students transfer out for bullying. Bullying? Oh. My mom has quite literally chosen the worst school possible. Still, it was the closest elementary school to home, so complaining wouldn't get him anywhere. Why were elementary schoolers bullying each other anyway? What has society come to? Hello? Ishin glanced to his right, and found himself face to face with nothing. Not even a ghost, just empty space where he expected a head. Like an invisible mannequin wearing a sailor-style uniform. It took him a second to realize the girl herself was invisible. Sight for Ishin was more of an auxiliary sense, something he relied on mostly out of habit rather than necessity. So when he'd been expecting a messy-haired, bright-eyed girl, he instead found visually nothing at all. Hello. Hi. The girl smiled. You're a transfer student too, right? Ishin nodded. What's your name? She asked brightly. I'm Hagakure Toru. Damn. I think I know who this is. When Ishin had watched My Hero Academia, he wasn't great with names, usually remembering people by standout features or their quirks. Still, there was that one running agenda he remembered about Hagakure. Is that a beam attack? My name's Shunkan Ishin. Nice to meet you, Shunkan-kun. Toru spun in place as if proudly showing herself off. My quirk is invisibility if you couldn't tell, hee. I couldn't. Ishin wasn't particularly eager to make new friends, but he knew that since Nejire had moved away, his parents were worried he'd end up isolated at school. And while he was introverted, he wasn't allergic to social interaction. So he decided that at least one acquaintance would be enough to keep his parents from worrying. Connections usually formed through shared circumstances anyway. Becoming acquaintances with Toru would check that box. Not much of a talker, huh? But yeah, people usually, huh? Toru paused before realizing what Ishin had said, then gasped. Wait, you can see me? Ishin nodded. Once he realized Toru was visually undetectable, curiosity had kicked in, and he'd instinctively focused his omniscient domain on her. For the record, Ishin's maximum high accuracy range was a 2-kilometer radius in every direction with a theoretical maximum of 4. That meant his domain covered roughly 33.5 cubic kilometers normally. The level of detail he perceived depended on how concentrated his focus was. Compressing his domain down to a volume of 5 cubic centimeters effectively gave him something like a 600,000 times zoom. Seeing individual cells only required about 400x zoom. Just based on the beam attack agenda he had chuckled at, Ishin could assume that Toru's quirk wasn't just invisibility as she had introduced, but light refraction. This curiosity prompted his investigation. Looking closer, he saw that each and every one of her cells possessed a unique mutation, a secondary membrane surrounding the plasma membrane that refracted light. That membrane had a limit, though. There was only so much light it could redirect before it was fully saturated, like a battery hitting maximum capacity. In theory, if that membrane were overloaded, Toru would become visible for a short time until that stored light depleted naturally. Regardless of all that technical detail, Ishin already knew what she looked like. Before Toru could say anything else, the teacher stepped back into the room. Hagakure-chan, Shunkin-kun, you can come in and introduce yourselves. Oh. Toru followed the teacher in, clearly disappointed at being interrupted. Yes, ma'am. As Ishin entered the classroom, he was met with the stares of curious children. Ignoring Toru, who was supposed to be focusing on her introduction that she had prepared for but kept glancing at him every few seconds, Ishin bowed. Their names were already written on the board, so all he needed to do was speak. Hello. My name is Shunkan Ishin. My quirk is mathematics. That was the name they'd settled on. Originally, Ishin had proposed personal reality, but Genzai thought it sounded too metaphysical. Since Ishin used mathematical formulas to teleport, mathematics was vague enough to work. It was ambiguous enough to encompass a wide variety of subjects. Letting other people speculate about what his quirk actually did was part of the strategy. Toru wore an invisibly confused expression, at least visible to Ishin. Mathematics didn't exactly explain how he could see her. The teacher led the class in applause, and Ishin stepped aside so Toru could introduce herself. If invisibility had one perk, it was that no one could see your expressions. So no one noticed how Toru snapped back to attention, and the small blush on her face as if she was caught being distracted. Well, with the sole exception of Shunkan Ishin, of course. Name's Hagakure Toru. Nice to meet you all. Since she was invisible, Toru exaggerated her movements to get her emotions across. As you can see or can't see my quirk's invisibility. Please take care of me. She finished with an over-the-top bow, earning noticeably louder applause. Nice to meet you both, the teacher said, gesturing toward 2 empty seats by the window. You can decide which one you'd like. I don't mind either one, Ishin said immediately. Now both of them looked at Toru, who hummed in thought, before picking the window seat. As they sat down, Ishin ignored the lingering stares from his classmates. You might be excited to have new friends, the teacher added, but please save your questions for after first period. How interesting. Nizu stared at the information displayed across the database he had quietly hacked into. While the police force hadn't requested his assistance, even with a vigilante running rampant through Mizudafu, the very city UA was located in, Nizu couldn't suppress his curiosity regarding this new figure. There were several reasons for that curiosity. The first was simple wariness. All Might had only recently fought All for One, and though the battle ended in victory, it had been a Pyrrhic one. If All Might couldn't recover, then the public safety of Japan was under threat. Now, a vigilante with a spatial-type quirk powerful enough to capture 300 criminals in the span of 2 weeks had appeared. In Mizudafu, no less. That alone was enough to prompt Nizu to begin his own investigation. Yet aside from narrowing down Blink's general area of activity, there was little else to go on. Nizu had analyzed every accessible camera in that region, reviewed timestamps, cross-referenced incident reports. And still, all he could do was quietly applaud the efficiency of Blink's quirk. There were no errors, traces, and no predictable patterns other than location. Unless new information surfaced, or unless Niji resorted to a brute force investigation that would take far too long, he had reached a dead end. However, that Monday Blink had vanished. Or rather, he hadn't intervened in a single crime that day. Even accounting for the natural dip in crime rates during daylight hours, Niji had been monitoring every camera within Blink's usual operating range. Petty crimes still occurred. Normally that was when Blink would strike. Yet today? There was nothing. Niji thought of every possible reason behind this absence before thinking of the most probable. As an educator, it was a time of month he knew all too well. Is Blink, Niji murmured softly, a smile slowly curling across his face. Perhaps a student? Chapter 29, Pre-Adolescence 5. So, what do I look like to you? During first period, Toru, who had been curious ever since Ishin mentioned he could see her, finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been eating at her all class. You look like a kid. And? That's it. What does? Before Toru could complain any further, the bell signaling the end of first period rang. As if by divine intervention, she didn't even get the chance to follow up before their classmates swarmed them. Shunkan, how does your quirk work? Does that mean you're good at math? Where are you from? At first, Ishin was the one crowded as the person who sat in the aisle seat, but Ishin calmly but quickly answered their questions without much enthusiasm. I can solve problems faster. I'd say I'm pretty mediocre at math. Saitama. After his short, lackluster replies, some of their classmates drifted over to Toru instead. Hagakure, are you permanently invisible? Do you know what you look like? Where are you from? Unlike Ishin's perfunctory responses, Toru answered every question with her usual boundless energy. Yep. I don't think I can turn it off, so it's kind of a pain sometimes. I was born invisible, so I haven't got the chance to see myself. But, Toru lowered her voice at the last part, her excitement barely contained as she remembered Ishin saying he could see her. Maybe, just maybe, she'd finally get the chance to know. I'm from Koto. My dad just got a promotion, so we had to move. The questions continued for a while, until their classmates eventually ran out of things to ask and seemed satisfied with the answers they'd gotten. As everyone returned to their seats, Toru finally found herself free. She raised a hand, ready to poke Ishin's side to get his attention, only to notice he was already glancing at her. So, ring ring. Ugh. Interrupted for the third time that day, Toru groaned in frustration. She was dying to know what she looked like. Inwardly, Toru swore that if Ishin had been lying to her this whole time, she'd do whatever it took to bite him. When the lunch bell rang, Ishin hadn't even stood up to head toward the food cart before his sleeve was grabbed by an invisible hand. Shunkan-kun, I hope you have some time to spare for me. Sure. If you don't, huh? Toru paused, confused. Aren't we waiting in line for lunch anyway? Ishin gestured toward the food cart, which was being manned by 4 of their classmates. As transfer students, both of them were exempt from classroom chores for their first week. If there was a single benefit of being a transfer student, then that was it. I guess so. See? Toru quietly followed Ishin to the lunch line. After using my amazing brain, she said dramatically, arms moving around her head in a voodoo-type motion. I realized something. How can you even see me? She genuinely couldn't wrap her head around it. His quirk was just math. How did that let him see her? Was math that all-knowing? She wasn't great at math, but if it could help her visibility, she might maybe be willing to try. Math is everywhere if you look hard enough, Ishin said, opting to be cryptic. That tells me nothing. Toru whined. Ishin grabbed his miso soup, salad, tuna mayo sandwich, and a carton of milk before heading back to his seat. Toru sat down beside him. As he picked up his chopsticks with his left hand, Ishin pulled a notebook and pencil from his bag with the other. He opened to a page while eating his salad, completely unfazed. Toru froze. How are you doing that? Toru asked in amazement. Math. There's no way math lets you do that. Toru protested, then suddenly perked up. Wait, I have the perfect way to prove if you can really see me. MHM? She raised both hands, or rather, from everyone else's perspective, it looked like she was throwing her hands up in surrender. Ishin thought it kind of looked like the absolute cinema meme. How many fingers am I holding up? Toru asked confidently, nodding to herself. I must be a genius. 5. Oh. You got it right. But that's not enough. Toru said quickly. You could have just guessed, right? So we're doing this a bunch of times. Okay. 2. 1. 6. 9. 6 again. After a few more, Toru then put her hands behind her back, now seeing if Ishin could even make a mistake. 4. Wait. How did you even do that? I had it behind my back. Math. Darn it. Toru clenched her fists, half annoyed, half impressed. What started as verification had somehow turned into a game. Well, this one grudgingly believes you can see me, hmph. She crossed her arms, punctuating it with an exaggerated huff. Hagakure Toru was born at a young age. Yet she was born invisible. Because of that, an entire layer of communication had been taken from her before she ever had a chance to learn it. People communicated using multiple aspects of their physical body. They relied on facial expressions, eye contact, subtle movements, things she simply couldn't use. Almost all of these were robbed of Toru from the start. In terms of the subtlety of human interactions, Toru was essentially mute. To compensate, she'd subconsciously made her voice more expressive and her gestures bigger. Exaggeration became her language. While it may have required a bit more effort on her end, it was still plenty effective. Of course, being so young, her ability to convey her emotions perfectly was still limited. Even so, despite trying to be nonchalant and confident like the heroes she admired, Toru couldn't help but feel a quiet thrill at the idea that someone could truly see her. She couldn't just let that go. Yet immediately asking for something felt a little wrong, and Toru believed her parents raised her right. I said I could see you and I wouldn't just lie about that, Ishin shrugged, taking a spoonful of miso soup. You're not eating? He gestured toward Toru's untouched tray. Only then did Toru notice the time. After checking the clock and realizing she still had enough, she let out a relieved breath. She dug in quickly, eating with renewed focus before rubbing her stomach in satisfaction. So, Shunkin-kun. Let's say, someone I knew was invisible. You are invisible. If there was one thing Ishin disliked, it was this someone I knew bullshit. Hey. Toru awkwardly laughed at the interruption. What do I really look like? Chapter 30, Pre-Adolescence 6. What do I really look like? Toru asked the question a little nervously, voicing what she'd wanted to know this entire time. Ishin hummed in thought. He lifted his pencil from the notebook he'd been sketching in and glanced toward where Toru's face would be, one eyebrow raised in consideration. What? Do I look fat? Toru asked quickly. Or do I look weird? You look annoying to draw. At the unfamiliar description, Toru couldn't help but tilt her head in confusion. Is that a bad thing? For some people. Maybe. Ugh, can't you just give me a clear answer? Toru waved her arms in frustration. I'll bite you. She bared her invisible teeth in what was meant to be a threatening manner. Ishin couldn't help but chuckle inwardly. Kinda reminds me of Nejire. Without comment, he handed his notebook to her. Ishin had insisted to Keiko that notebooks were pointless for someone with the processing and memorization power of multiple supercomputers, but she'd told him he should at least look like he was studying. Actually taking notes, however, was wildly inefficient. What's this for? Toru asked, opening it. On the first page was a pencil sketch of a girl wearing their school uniform. There was no color, but even Toru, whose artistic ability peaked at stick figures, could tell it was good. Like, really good. The girl looked like she was in motion, 3 fingers raised on both hands, a confident, lively expression on her face. Her hair was messy as if it hadn't been brushed properly and shoulder length, and the whole drawing carried the charm of a kid enjoying their youth. Who's this? Toru glanced up at Ishin, only to receive an incredulous look in return. Is this what I look like? Yeah. Toru had always wondered what she looked like. She'd tried things before, painting herself for example, but that attempt had ended when her parents caught her flooding the bathroom. Yet now, with a visible picture-like drawing of what she looked like, her initial reaction wasn't surprise. Instead, she felt confused. Don't I look a little too cute? How narcissistic. Ishin drawled next to her. No, seriously. Toru gestured wildly between the drawing and herself, pushing her invisible hair around as if she could somehow compare the two. I could be a child actor. She looked back at Ishin. You're still invisible, he said flatly. Just so you know. I know that. Toru huffed. It's just a what if, you know. Yeah. Maybe. Ishin shrugged. But then, ring, ring, rah. Toru threw her hands up in frustration. How many times was this stupid bell going to be interrupting her today? The math teacher walked in just as she was mid-frustration. Unfortunately, since she was invisible, it just looked like random, distracting waving. You in the back, hands down. Everyone get your textbooks out and go to page 13. Just 'cause it's the first day doesn't mean you can start slacking off. Oh, I forgot to put back my tray. Hagakure looked down, yet her lunch tray was nowhere in sight. Instead, there was her math textbook and her notebook. What? She turned to her right. Ishin was sitting calmly, notebook back in his hands, looking like the most normal student in the room. Pust, Shunkin-kun, she whispered. Did you put the trays back? With his seemingly all-knowing math quirk, maybe he was behind it. Without looking at her, Ishin wrote something on an empty page and tilted it toward her. No. Huh? Then who did? She grabbed her pencil and scribbled furiously. Then who did? Ishin wrote below the no. Who knows? Maybe a ghost? Even I know ghosts don't exist. Hey, you must have done it. He wrote again. Caught. Hee, I knew it was you. So how'd you do it? He paused. Then wrote. Math. Toru slammed her hands on the desk. She was so sick of that stupid excuse. Unfortunately, this caught the attention of the very strict math teacher. You in the back. That's a warning. Sorry, sensei. After being scolded, Toru glared in Ishin's direction. He sat there like a model student, stupid calm face and all. I know you can see me. Ishin didn't react. Left unsatisfied, Toru reluctantly turned her attention back to class. As the final bell rang, Ishin stood up, ready to head straight home. Only to be stopped again. Why did you ignore me? Toru asked. Ignore you? Ishin replied. We were in class. You're supposed to pay attention. You weren't even taking notes. Toru complained. Not taking notes doesn't constitute not paying attention. Ishin retorted. Cons what? Ishin sighed quietly. You really do remind me of her. Though I don't know why I'm acting like Nejire's dead or estranged. Remind you of who? Toru caught the mumble instantly. A friend. A friend? Toru brightened. Oh. Shunkin-kun, we should definitely be friends. Just because I can see you? He asked, eyebrow raised. Well, that's like a super-duper tiny part of it, but what you don't want to? I don't mind. Get a friend quest complete. I truly am a master of social interaction, Ishin thought. I'm not antisocial because I can't make friends. It's because it's too easy. Maybe he'd get even more friends than Nejire and brag into her face instead. Yay! Toru cheered. See you tomorrow, Shunkin-kun. I'm gonna go make some more friends. Ishin watched as she happily wandered off toward a group of girls, then shrugged. Hey. A friend's a friend. I'm back. Welcome home, Shun-kun. Genzai was already on the couch, home early and watching TV. As Ishin headed toward the bathroom, folded clothes and a towel teleported into his arms, and his backpack vanished into his room. I'm taking a bath, he announced but paused, then reappeared in front of his dad just as Genzai opened his mouth. Genzai stared at him, exasperated. I know you can see me speak ahead of time, he said, but at least let me start and finish my sentence. Sorry. Genzai just shook his head exasperatedly. This weekend I've got a business trip to central Tokyo. Got myself some tickets to a popular hero's farewell event at the Tokyo Sky Egg. I think his name was Captain Celebrity. There'll probably be a ton of pro heroes there. Wanna come? Ishin thought it over. Well, seems like something Nejire would like. How many tickets? 3. Sure. Chapter 31, Pre-Adolescence 7. After taking a bath, the first thing Ishin heard was, Shunchan. He teleported his dirty laundry into the basket, then walked into the living room, where Genzai was still watching TV. Dad, I'm heading over to Nejire's. Have fun. Genzai waved lazily and Ishin teleported away. As always, the moment he appeared in Nejire's room, he was immediately glomped by a hug. Shunchan, how was your first day of school? Well, I'd say it was pretty okay. Really? Yeah. What about you? It was great. So many people in my class have such cool quirks. This is kind of giving me a bad omen. Nejire, Ishin said, raising an eyebrow. You didn't go around asking everyone about their quirks, did you? No. She shook her head enthusiastically. I was planning to ask tomorrow. Thought so. Ishin wasn't particularly good at enthusiastically making friends, but he was somewhat familiar with the mindset of middle schoolers. Rather, it was actually common knowledge, due to mental and bodily changes. Even before he had reincarnated, it was common to be insecure about one's height, change in voice, or even just the appearance of acne. Ishin believed it was the height of when the community mentality of elementary school kind of devolved into smaller independent groups. And in a quirk society where people had an extra trait to compare, judge, and brag about, it became even easier to be singled out. As they say, the nail that gets stuck out gets hammered down. While this wasn't as extreme in hero culture, middle school was a place where everyone was supposed to be equal. Overly curious personalities like Nejire's tended to draw the wrong kind of attention. Ishin, who definitely 100% wasn't worried about Nejire's social health, thought it was necessary for a small lesson. After all, even if Nejire had mellowed a bit thanks to a certain someone, that didn't erase how volatile kids could be. Nejire. In a blink, Ishin teleported onto Nejire's chair and gently relocated her onto the bed. She tilted her head. I think we need to talk about how you present yourself in middle school. Don't worry, Nejire started. Better safe than sorry, Ishin interrupted. Also, if you listen properly, we can go to an event with a lot of pro heroes. Like, a lot. Nejire immediately sat down, miming a zipper over her mouth. Okay, Ishin began. This might not apply to you specifically, but kids your age are usually really self-conscious about their quirks. Nejire raised her hand. Yes, Nejire? Shunchan-sensei. Why would they be self-conscious if everyone has such interesting quirks? This is conjecture, Ishin said flatly, but that's just how hero society works. But how? Look, Nejire. Ishin teleported a whiteboard and an expo marker into his hands, sat down on the floor, and motioned for Nejire to join him. What's the job almost every middle schooler wants? To be a hero. Nejire said instantly. Correct. And while people used to argue everyone was equal before quirks, in this society no one really is. Aha. So what makes a hero? Saving people, she said confidently. Correct, Ishin said, sketching a tiny All Might and circling it. But to hero society that isn't the whole picture. Why not? Isn't the entire point to save people? Nejire asked. That's the definition, Ishin agreed. You'd get along with a guy who really likes swords, by the way. But practically speaking, what is a hero? A job? Exactly. He drew 3 arrows branching out from All Might. And jobs make money. Ishin added rough doodles, a podium, merchandise, and civilians being rescued. I'm fuzzy on the details, but heroes earn money through popularity, merch, and some kind of activity quota. Huh? Really? Yeah. Like all the All Might hoodies you see at Don Quixote. But you're probably more familiar with the popularity part. Oh. Like the hero rankings. MHM. Ishin nodded. And unfortunately, most people don't have quirks suited for hero work unless they train really hard physically. These days, someone could probably throw a car if they exercised enough. Oh. Shunchan, we should start exercising again. Sure. But most people don't have the mentality for that, especially when they already have a quirk to rely on. Why not? Ishin shrugged. Who knows? He capped the marker. So here's the issue. Imagine you had an extremely specialized or a hard-to-use quirk. Then someone in your class who seems perfect with a hero-suited quirk that's flashy and all that, starts asking you tons of questions about it. Nejire hummed. I'd ask tons of questions about the quirk they have. Don't change, Nejire, Ishin muttered, rubbing his temples. But most kids would feel jealous. They'd think things like, why is she bragging? But aren't you still in elementary school? Yeah, Ishin said flatly. But I'm smarter than you. Dang it. Nejire pouted, then tilted her head. So if you say they're going to be jealous, how do I make friends? Ishin paused. You're not wrong for being curious about other people's quirks, he said. I just don't want people misunderstanding you 'cause it's annoying. Just take this as advice, Ishin continued. If the thing they're most insecure about is their quirk and yours stands out, just don't lead with it. What? Let me finish. Get closer through hobbies first. Games, food, whatever, what you get close with isn't that important. Ishin proposed. The important part is that if they understand who you really are, they're way less likely to misunderstand your intentions. Well, if you say so, Shunchan. Nejire nodded. Ishin was her main source of information most of the time, and more often than not he was right. Thanks for listening. So, Nejire leaned forward. What's the event with all the pro heroes? Oh. It's kind of like a concert/farewell party for a hero named Captain Celebrity. Oh. I know him. Nejire pulled out the new phone her parents had gotten her, complete with a vanilla-themed case. She showed Ishin an ad with Captain Celebrity and Ingenium. Wow, Ishin said. This guy looks really pretentious. What does that mean, Shunchan? Pretentious. You remind me of a friend I made today. You made a friend, Shunchan? Ha. Chapter 32, Pre-Adolescence 8. I really hate crowded places. Ishin's omniscient domain normally had a radius of 2 kilometers. However, its size shrank or expanded depending on how much redundant information flowed through his other senses. After all, the domain relied almost entirely on Ishin's sense of touch. Sight, hearing, smell, and taste were largely filtered out, factored away to prevent redundancy. In a place like this, packed with nearly 50,000 people, 50,000 overlapping smells, sounds, movements, and shifting variables, those excess inputs acted like a massive muffler on his domain. Anything with a high enough density was treated as a variable. That rule existed for a reason, to avoid accidentally dismembering someone during teleportation. Of course, Ishin's 4 other senses were still absurdly advanced. His supercomputer-like brain handled the overload relatively easily. So while the information was irritating, it wasn't physically harmful. Still, it reduced his domain to roughly a quarter of its usual size. Even then, the entire 500-meter sky egg remained within range. In the unlikely event of something catastrophic, say a large-scale terrorist attack, Ishin could save it. Why was he thinking about something so morbid? Well, wasn't it natural to have those kinds of scenarios where you're in a terrorist situation and you imagine yourself saving the day? Wow, there's so many people. Nejire bounced beside him, gripping his hand tightly so she wouldn't get lost, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Genzai, who had only skimmed the event details, took one look at the crowd and immediately shook his head. Nope. I'm out. Unlike Ishin, Genzai had a very normal brain. He announced he'd wait at a nearby library and pick them up afterward. Yeah, Ishin muttered absently. Do you know which pro heroes are showing up today? Nejire asked, nearly vibrating in excitement. Well, Ishin may have not read anything about it, he did have his domain. But the suspense is part of the event, Ishin replied as they stepped into the elevator leading up into the sky egg. Ah, Nejire slumped for half a second, then perked right back up. But, Ishin added, there'll be a lot of heroes. That was what Ishin ended with, as he and Nejire went to their seats. Wow. It's Ingenium. Midnight. Nejire rattled off names non-stop, her voice filled with awe. Ishin listened quietly. Seeing so many pro-heroes gathered in one place sparked his curiosity. Watching Quirks operate in real time, especially high-level ones, was genuinely interesting. Ishin reduced the range of his domain just to see the inner workings of some heroes. It was a little interesting to see how each hero had a specific mutation that resulted in each form, like how Ingenium's engine really worked. Of course, some quirks were I do this so it works like that type, so Ishin didn't particularly know how that even worked, but still. This is more entertaining than I expected. Watching heroes perform choreographed stunts felt strangely dissonant. But if you combined entertainer and public servant, you got what this society called a hero. Ishin came from a world where heroism was an ideal, not a spectacle. From this angle, pro-heroes felt closer to celebrities than saviors. Commercialization does that, I guess. While I don't support murderers like Stain, this hero society is kind of mind-boggling to see. A flawed society. Of course, Ishin didn't have the social obligation nor a desire to fix this so-called flawed society. Still, he couldn't help but think how this world would react to someone like Miyashiro. A man who could only find happiness by saving others. A man whose happiness required misfortune to exist in the first place, yet paradoxically didn't want said misfortune to exist. I might be cooking here. Ishin didn't really believe that one man could change society. But if a book telling the story of a Miyashiro did exist, then it could definitely make some bank. Well, with a man so flawed that he can only obtain happiness through the act of saving, this world would be perfect for him. Rather, because of this society, the themes that Ishin was familiar with back in his previous world weren't prevalent in this world. So what Ishin had enjoyed as media talk unfortunately didn't exist. Though it would have been funny for people to give All Might a 8 out of 10 in complexity. Well, if there was a genre that didn't change after changing worlds, it was rom-coms. But wasn't there just something so cool about being a hidden author who was actually really popular? There was a reason the hidden overpowered guy trope was popular until it got oversaturated with slop. He glanced at Nejire. She was completely absorbed in what appeared to be a pro-hero fashion showcase? Well, this many heroes wouldn't gather again anytime soon. Might as well enjoy it. They were celebrities for a reason. As there was a layover between acts, Ishin turned on his phone to check the time. Even if this event was a little entertaining, being in a place with so many people drained his energy. Just as Ishin was about to put the phone away, he pulled it back out and showed the time to Nejire as well. "So much time already?" she gasped. "I mean, yeah." He stood about to head to the restroom. Boom. The entire dome shook. Ishin overheard a conversation to his right. "What's all this shaking? An earthquake maybe?" Just as Ishin stopped focusing on the heroes, he enlarged his domain to the original muffled 500 meters to see. Villains? Faceless black creatures circled the sky egg. Is this a Nomu? Doesn't look like one though. Did he just actually find himself in a 9/11 plot? He narrowed his eyes, analyzing the threat. Strangely, Ishin didn't feel fear like the rest of the people. Instead, he only thought one thing. Annoyance. Such misfortune. He prepared to select the monsters before teleporting them together. Shunchan. Nejire clutched his sleeve, grounding him just as another explosion hit. For a brief moment, weightlessness washed over the arena before stabilizing. Wah! What's happening? There were multiple screams and the crowd shifted, pushing the more lighter people around. In order to prevent Nejire from falling, Ishin immediately grabbed her arm. Shunchan, what's going on? Well, Ishin said slowly, they're saying it might be an earthquake. The sudden influx of redundant information made precise targeting impossible. Damn it. I really hate crowded places. You know, don't you? Nejire whispered. You always know everything. I don't know what you're talking about. Liar, she pouted. Nejire's voice softened and she gripped his sleeve tighter, like she was afraid to let go. Shunchan, if you can do anything, if you can really do anything, can you save everyone? I don't know what gave you the idea that I can do anything, but there are heroes here. You're supposed to let them handle it. But you're my hero, aren't you? The words came out softer, like she was afraid to be rejected. He ruffled her hair. Ishin sighed. Don't you find saying that kind of embarrassing? Nejire blinked, trying to smile through her fear. Shunchan, please. His patience was wearing thin from how long this variable selection was taking. At this point, precision wasn't worth it. Yes, I'm your hero. So, can you save everyone, Shunchan? Yeah. Sure. Then do it. I believe in you. Her smile stayed bright, but her eyes were trembling. Ishin took his attention off Nejire, closing his eyes. If I can't freeze one thing, I'll freeze everything. If Ishin couldn't select specific variables in his domain, then he'd select everything and then decide what to do after. Wait? Speed? Just who the hell do you think I am? Those variables ceased to matter the moment they were in his domain. I'm so going to get a headache after this. Ishin took in a deep breath before exhaling. Stop. Chapter 33, Pre-Adolescence 9. Stop. In that instant, everything within a 500-meter radius of Shunkan Ishin entered a state where every object inside his domain was being teleported back to a location he had marked in time. Range wasn't the only thing that had grown with his development. The interval between teleports had also shortened, now reduced to a point that exceeded human reaction time entirely. Ishin's most recent display operated at an interval of 0.2 seconds. However, this time, Ishin wasn't taking in any new information between teleports, which paradoxically made the process far simpler. What he was doing was reverting everything to a single, perfectly memorized moment in time. This drastically reduced the number of variables he had to consider, but demanded far more constant calculations. Ironically, the longer this imitation of frozen time lasted, the easier it became for Ishin to maintain it. Yet the moment Ishin had spoken the word stop, every object, human, monster, debris, was forced back to its original position. Every 0.001 seconds. Again and again. To even move a single meter before being reset, one would need instantaneous speed approaching Mach 3. Just to move 1 meter. In every sense of the word, everything within the domain was frozen. With the sole exception of Shunkan Ishin, of course. With a few caveats. What is happening? Unable to speak, Himawari Koichi, aka the Crawler, could only watch as the bomb-type villain who had been moments away from striking Captain Celebrity froze midair. It stopped? That's good. But I can't move either. Backstage, multiple pro heroes were frozen in place. What the hell is this? Mirko immediately flexed her muscles, attempting to force herself out, but found that despite feeling like she was moving, wasn't actually going anywhere. Ingenium activated his engine, and he could feel his fuel draining and could feel movement. Yet his body refused to budge an inch. Edge Shot thinned his body to thread-like proportions and, to everyone's surprise, managed to extend himself several meters before abruptly stopping. Soon after, Best Jeanist was able to manipulate his fibers, only for them to halt once they reached a certain point. He altered their configuration and managed brief movement again before being stopped once more. So Quirks themselves aren't completely frozen? Ingenium barely finished the thought before a voice echoed inside his head. This is Pro Hero Mandalay of the Wild Wild Pussycats, addressing all pro heroes within the Tokyo Sky Egg. We believe the perpetrator is using a spatial-type quirk that forcibly prevents movement. While some may have already come to this assumption, transformation-type quirks can temporarily move within this space, and emitter-type quirks can still be activated. However, I strongly advise against using transformation-type quirks unless you can continuously alter the affected area of your body. True to form, the Wild Wild Pussycats had begun gathering data the moment the phenomenon occurred. Using Tiger's pliabody, they confirmed that he could move briefly before being reset. Mandalay verified that her telepathy still functioned. And through Ragdoll's search, combined with Morse code communication through eyes, they determined the range of the effect. An estimated 500 meters. People in nearby buildings, staff, and civilians below were frozen just the same. Since when did a quirk like this even exist? As expected of pro heroes. Though I don't know why I'm thinking like a mastermind. Barely a minute had passed and they were already narrowing down the rules of his frozen time. They weren't truly stopped, just reset before they could react, creating the illusion of immobility. However, there was one thing Ishin couldn't fully halt without sacrificing range. Quirk-generated phenomena. Quirks, more often than not, had a habit of ignoring physics altogether. Watching Tiger's pliabody, Ishin couldn't help but feel annoyed. How does one increase their volume while also keeping the same density throughout? Still, it didn't matter. Ishin was sifting through every single variable within his domain and only picking out the ones he considered monsters. His greatest limitation was that even if he halted the user, he couldn't pause the quirk factor itself. Which was complete nonsense. Well, my computations are already done. At this point, Ishin was simply holding the pose. Like the world's most high-stakes mannequin challenge. When will this pause end? Koichi kept his quirk active, just in case. But he and Captain Celebrity watched as the bomb-type villain suddenly appeared 30 meters away in the blink of an eye. Then, almost immediately, another villain fused into it. Then another. And another. The figure before them stopped resembling a man entirely. Captain Celebrity thought of a phenomena while looking at the amalgamation in front of him. Rat King. A moment later, that Rat King was dismantled in half. Then again. And 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 again. Even if they looked more monster than human, Koichi and Captain Celebrity couldn't even look away, as the Rat King was slowly getting sliced into pieces. The fused monsters watched as their super regeneration did absolutely nothing. After all, once you were dismantled by teleportation, the two halves were sliced down to an atomic level. They watched as the villain became closer and closer to dust, pale-faced. In addition to Koichi and Captain Celebrity, there was another group of prime witnesses in a helicopter. Eraserhead and Detective Tsukachi Naomasa. They had been preparing to enter the Sky Egg's airspace when Mandalay's telepathy stopped them just in time. Naomasa stared at the scene, dread tightening his chest. My sister's inside that building? Spatial-type quirks were notoriously volatile and dangerous. And as Naomasa looked at the Sky Egg, he realized he had no idea how to counter something like this. Hey, Tsukachi, I think we need All Might here. Eraserhead spoke. While Eraserhead didn't know what All Might was going to do, he was All Might. What couldn't he do? In Japan, All Might was practically a walking deus ex machina. The Tokyo Sky Egg might be staying upright, but it was still under threat of falling over if this spatial-type quirk using vigilante just decided it would be fine to let go. Even if the bomber were all gone, the main threat had undoubtedly changed from the bombers to this unknown vigilante. Yet, just as he was about to make the choice to call All Might, his grip on the phone relaxed in confusion. Naomasa watched as the crawler started moving around again. Times resumed. A/N, I forgot to put a timer so it's uploading 30 minutes late, sorry. A/N, Mandalay and Ragdoll low-key both have super useful quirks. I haven't seen much done with that squad. By the way, that muffler thing previous chapter isn't a nerf. I responded to a comment about how his domain was only 500M about how his domain fluctuates, so if you're curious, just read that. I don't like it if things aren't consistent or don't make sense when it comes to actual ability usage, cause I make sure of a lot of stuff before implementing it. The only kinda nerf which isn't even a nerf is how quirk factors work. This'll be explained in a future chap if you don't get it this chap. Just wanted to get that out there cause I and other readers are proly sensitive about arbitrarily nerfing a character without a reason, which is a trope I also dislike. I made Ishin to be op for this verse, which is why most chaps are cute interactions, and occasionally sprinkle in some aura farming moments like these. If I didn't include this, realistically I could just finish this FIC in like 20 chaps and we'd call it a day, just cause I don't like nerfing characters for no reason. I'd rather finish the actual plot in 10 chapters than nerf my MC for literally no reason. Sray for rant even though I swore not to make a long A/N. Just confused on why it was called a nerf. Have a good day and thanks for reading. Chapter 34, Pre-Adolescence 10. Undeniably, when it came to weight, there were obvious limitations. However, unlike Shirai Kuriko, whose teleportation was restricted by strict weight limits, Ishin had modified each formula to the point where, while within his domain, weight simply wasn't an issue. Of course, if he tried to teleport anything outside the domain's range, then yes, weight limitations applied. But on the bright side, the entirety of the Tokyo Sky Egg was contained within his domain. Unfortunately, repairing the Sky Egg itself wasn't possible. The debris had already broken down into pieces so small that if Ishin attempted to put it back together, he'd have to drastically shrink the domain for increased accuracy. After all, while the domain passively classified objects as variables, it didn't account for microscopic components. If it did, even Ishin would be stuck with a constant splitting headache while maintaining it. That was why it was necessary to decrease the size of the domain when increasing the accuracy. Sure, Ishin could increase accuracy without shrinking the domain, but he'd end up with a headache to end all headaches. And as a modern human being, he wasn't exactly a masochist like those shonen protagonists who seemed to be able to shrug off an explosion without flinching. So one might ask, what would Ishin do? Well, he'd already accomplished what he wanted to. The villain had been stopped. Captain Celebrity was already holding up the Sky Egg, so the logical next step was to evacuate everyone and lighten the load. And Ishin wasn't a man of hesitation. Soon after that thought, he began teleporting groups of people down to the surface. The more individuals he removed from his immediate vicinity, the less redundant information entered his area, allowing his reach to extend even farther. Well, obviously, he was also going to rescue himself. Not doing so would have been stupid and suspicious. Ishin didn't particularly care how the pro-heroes planned to keep the Sky Egg from falling. They were pros for a reason. They'd probably survive. Huh? Number 6, the one who had orchestrated the entire bombing for the sole purpose of killing Captain Celebrity, stared from a distance as everything came to a halt. What the? Even though he watched with his own 2 eyes the disintegration of the bombers, he grit his teeth, tapping on the phone faster and faster, as if the signal could get through force. Yet he watched as his phone did nothing. Damn it, damn it. Damn it. Crack. The phone shattered in his grip, fragments scattering to the ground. Number 6 had always known that, despite the high probability of killing Captain Celebrity and everyone inside the Sky Egg, there was always the possibility of a deus ex machina. But there was no sign of All Might. What kind of kiddie show is this? He scowled. No stakes, no suspense at all. Ha. Ha. He crushed what remained of the phone between his fingers. Number 6, I recommend you leave that location immediately. Through the ear communicator, a voice went through. It wasn't a voice with boundless confidence as Number 6 remembered, but it had a bit of caution. All for One was watching through multiple cameras surrounding the venue, and unlike Number 6, he had seen what was happening. With a quirk that allowed him to steal and wield multitudes of others, All for One possessed numerous abilities that enhanced his perception of time itself. Number May 6th have had overclock, but he hadn't even considered that what he was seeing wasn't the full picture. All for One observed as everything within the radius of that unknown quirk blinked through space at a rate public cameras could barely register. He had also witnessed the destruction of the artificial next-level villains. This display of spatial control made Kurojiri, one of the most optimized and first high-end Nomu ever created, look like discarded trash by comparison. A delicate combination of multiple quirks, refined solely to produce an extremely versatile spatial ability, now reduced to something akin to an ant before a mountain. Well, that might have been a bit harsh. From what he could tell, Kurojiri still held the advantage in range and utility, given that his power revolved around portals rather than direct teleportation. But in terms of sheer combat potential and deadliness, this unknown ability far surpassed anything Kurojiri could possibly achieve. All for One might know All Might, but this person? Nothing. Number 6 was still a valuable experiment that hadn't outlived his purpose. Allowing him to die or be captured here would be wasteful. Ah, already? Number 6 complained. Feels like nothing even happened. But even I might agree. He turned to leave just as... Bang! Wow. Ishin watched as Best Genius stabilized the tower using reinforced metal cables. Despite the circumstances, it barely felt like a terrorist attack. Aside from the emotional shock, nothing else had truly happened. Soon after Ishin had teleported down, they were able to get the Sky Egg stable enough to not fall on them at any second, if even the crowd had to be moved. Ishin observed everything with a calm, almost placid expression. Man, did I aura farm enough for you, Master Piccolo? The thought drifted through his mind. He glanced over at Nejire, who was staring at him with wide, sparkling eyes, equal parts amazement and happiness. Before she could say anything, Ishin gently pressed his index finger to his lips. While the odds of a witness were low, the prime suspect behind the Sky Egg incident could still be somewhere in the crowd. As a result, several heroes suggested relocating everyone. Relief workers and law enforcement were quickly dispatched, but aside from the initial jolt, where a few people had stumbled and picked up minor bruises, there were no injuries. Citing uncertainty around the perpetrator's quirk, officials decided it was safer to keep everyone close to medical facilities, just in case. Ishin called Genzai to explain the situation. Genzai was understandably worried, but there wasn't much he could do beyond waiting. After Ishin and Nejire got some free merch and drinks from a nearby area, they sat down in a relatively quiet area, waiting until everyone was let go. After all, even if authorities wanted suspects or witnesses, they couldn't exactly detain 50,000 people in the middle of Tokyo. Shunchan, Nejire began, only to be cut off once more. You can start when we get home, Ishin said calmly. Darn it. Chapter 36, Pre-Adolescence 11. While on the train ride home from central Tokyo to Ishin's house, it was uncharacteristically quiet. Well, mainly because they were on a subway and even Nejire knew better than to be loud there. Genzai, however, was watching the news on his phone with a complex expression. The stations were barely able to get even a snippet of the Sky Egg stasis incident, but there was footage of people suddenly being teleported onto the surface near reporters. Genzai was fully aware of his son's abilities. He was also fully aware of how intelligent his son was. Genzai and Keiko were relatively lax parents, though that mentality mostly came from raising a child who seemed capable of raising himself. Ishin hadn't thrown tantrums as a child. When he went to school, he always had the highest grades. He was respectful, did chores, and helped clean without needing to be prompted. All in all, with the exception of his withdrawn personality, Ishin could be considered what most parents called a perfect child. Even if Ishin's personality was a bit eccentric. Genzai had also seen how easily Ishin defeated the monster during their Akita vacation. He didn't know many spatial-type quirk users besides Ishin, but the teleportation shown in the footage was identical to how Ishin did it. No charge-up, visual indicator, nothing. One moment no one was there and the next they were. Shunkuin probably had a good reason for doing this. He didn't. Nejire just asked so he did. Nejire had already gotten permission from her parents to stay over for the weekend, so when they arrived, she took a bath first as the guest. Once Nejire was gone, Genzai and Ishin were finally able to talk. Was the person behind the sky egg stasis you, Shunkuin? In contrast to Genzai's solemn tone, Ishin didn't see any reason to hide it. Anyone familiar with his teleportation could make the same deduction. Spatial-type quirks were rare after all. Yeah. I did it, Ishin said plainly. I'm not lying and I won't deny it. Ishin shrugged. Genzai was momentarily disoriented by the immediate admission, but then he shook his head and chuckled in exasperation. Of course. This is just how my son is. Shunkuin, Genzai said, why do you want to become a hero? Wow, coming out of left field, Ishin thought, before giving the first answer that came to mind. Because Nejire said we should be heroes. Just get married already, Genzai inwardly complained. This old man's going to get diabetes. That can't be your only reason. Genzai looked at Ishin's unchanged expression, confusion creeping in. Right? Dad, no offense, Ishin said, raising an eyebrow, but I'm like 10 years old. Do you really expect me to have some deep, well-thought-out reason? He paused. Let's just say I'm in it for the money. It really is hard to lecture you, Shunkuin, Genzai said, shaking his head with a tired smile. Then why did you protect everyone at the Sky Egg? Again, because Nejire asked me to save everyone. Keiko really should have been here to hear this. Genzai sighed. Well, as long as you understand your own motivations, I guess that's fine. Then he added quietly, just know that I'll always be on your side. Thanks, Dad. And don't get caught. Nizu hummed as he studied the information in front of him. Who would have thought that just as I was dreading the tediousness of finding Blink, information like this would fall into my lap? The computer file contained profiles of everyone who had attended Captain Celebrity's farewell event. Normally, the population density in Blink's known area of operation was far smaller than the number of people present during the Sky Egg stasis incident. This, however, was the first time Nizu could properly observe the scope of Blink's true abilities. By comparing Blink's usual operational range with the individuals present in and around the Sky Egg, Nizu could begin narrowing down suspects. All of this, of course, rested on the assumption that Blink had to be within a certain range of their operation to use their quirk. If it turned out that Blink didn't have such a limitation, then while tracking them would become far more difficult, their threat level would increase dramatically. Well then, Nizu said, smiling faintly, let's start with the most obvious step. Filtering the list down to individuals who were still students and had residences in Mizudafu, the pool of suspects shrank once again. After isolating the prime candidates, however, the problem remained the same. Catching someone who could teleport without moving themselves was nearly impossible. They would have to hope the suspect teleported personally, and that it was caught on camera. Though there was one hero better suited than most to detect teleportation. Elsewhere, other hero agencies were also examining the Sky Egg stasis incident. After all, it was the largest recorded instance of illegal quirk usage/vigilantism in recent history. While some agencies were reluctant to investigate someone who had effectively acted as an unknown ally, others were being pushed by the Hero Public Safety Commission. In their view, leaving a rogue spatial-type quirk user with overwhelming power unchecked was unacceptable. Most heroes refused. Some chose to look the other way. Others simply couldn't help due to their specializations. Mirko was an example of both. If the unknown individual had saved her and hadn't made a show of it, then fine. She wasn't about to chase ghosts. Besides, she'd been one of the heroes completely immobilized during the incident. What the hell did the HPSC want her to do? She didn't even run an agency, and she certainly wasn't specialized in tracking. So despite her high ranking, she ignored the HPSC's request. Iwabumi was much the same. She'd been immobilized as well, and investigative work wasn't her forte. She opted out, citing exactly that. Surprisingly, most heroes followed the same line of thinking. While emitter quirks and sometimes transformation quirks could do something, when they remembered that feeling of helplessness when being stuck, most thought it was wise to not poke the tiger if it was feigning sleep. Maybe if the person behind the incident did more than unauthorized quirk usage, they'd intervene. But for now it was better to just not disturb the sleeping tiger. Chapter 37, Pre-Adolescence 12. Shunchan. Nejire sat on Ishin's bed, her legs folded into a W, already changed into her pajamas. Ishin replied without turning around, eyes still on his computer screen. I really wanted to ask you about today, Nejire continued, popping to her feet on the mattress and pointing accusingly at him, and I even held it in all the way until we got home. But here you are, just typing on your computer. Using her quirk, Nejire floated over and lightly landed on Ishin's shoulders, leaning down so her face was right next to his, covering Ishin's view of the computer screen. Her cheeks were puffed out in an exaggerated pout. She'd held it in on the subway ride back to Ishin's house. She'd held it in during dinner, too. I had a flash of inspiration, Ishin said calmly. I know your memory is perfect. Nejire shot back. I know you inside and out, Shunchan. So let's do something. Yeah. Ishin stood up, Nejire still perched on his shoulders. They were around the same height now, though Nejire was still a few centimeters taller, which made the whole thing look a little ridiculous. Still, Ishin had trained with her plenty before the move, he was more than strong enough to support her weight. Never underestimate baseline human strength in the My Hero Academia world. At this point, they were practically low-tier super strength holders. What did you want to ask? Ishin said, adjusting her so she wouldn't slip. How strong are you, Shunchan? Nejire smiled. Finally, Shunchan was going to give her some answers. That's subjective. A clear answer. Nejire protested, pouting again. She almost grabbed his hair in frustration, but instead redirected her energy into loosely braiding it. Ishin hummed. Dare I say, I'm the strongest? He was joking. Nejire nodded along anyway. I thought so. What's with all this glazing? Ishin drawled. So? What do you actually want to do? Well. Nejire perked up. Since we're both gonna be heroes someday, let's think of cool hero costumes and names. Yes, milady, Ishin replied dryly, teleporting his school notebook into his hand. Honestly, when else was he going to use it other than drawing at this point? He teleported 2 cushions onto the floor, carefully setting Nejire down before sitting beside her himself. A pencil appeared in his fingers. Ishin flipped open the notebook to the first page. It was filled with his earliest drawing of Hagakure Toru, her excited expression somehow captured perfectly, even on paper. Oh, you told me about her. Nejire said eagerly. Her quirk was invisibility. She trailed off. As Ishin moved to turn the page, Nejire stopped him, staring at the drawing with narrowed eyes. Wait, hold on. Shunchan, how can you see her if she's invisible? Math. Nejire tilted her head. But your quirk is teleportation. No, it's math. Really? Yeah. Then how do you do all that stuff? Ishin raised an eyebrow. Do you really want me to explain? Nejire, being a curious child, had actually asked how Ishin's teleportation worked already a few times before. And every single time Ishin started talking about M-theory and higher dimensions, her brain had short-circuited completely. Hey, Nejire laughed awkwardly, quickly flipping the page like the question had never existed. There were more drawings of Toru, posing, smiling, clearly aware she was being sketched. You really like drawing her, huh? Nejire said quietly. If you were invisible your entire life, Ishin replied with a sigh, and then met someone who could see you, wouldn't you ask them to draw you? Nejire paused. Then draw me too, she declared, clutching the notebook. Now that she thought about it, Shunchan barely drew anything back then other than on the paper cups. so he should at least draw her a few times. What, jealous? Ishin teased. What happened to costumes? You can just draw me in a costume. Real slick, dodging my question, Ishin muttered, but he still turned the page and lowered his pencil. So, any ideas? Nejire went silent. If you don't answer in 10 seconds, I'm closing the notebook and we're doing something else. Wait. Nejire grabbed his arm. 10 seconds is too short. 10. What? She started shaking him furiously as if that might stop the countdown. Spoiler alert, it didn't. 9. 8. Blueberry vanilla. Nejire blurted. Ishin paused. Then nodded. Sure. Nejire immediately stopped shaking him and slumped back in relief. Phew. So, ice cream themed? Ishin asked. He began sketching. When Nejire peeked down, she saw herself inside a full-body ice cream mascot costume, everything fully covered except her face, like something you'd see at a kid's birthday party. Not this kind of ice cream themed. Nejire whined. Still, she didn't have the heart to protest too hard. Somehow, despite how silly it should have looked, Ishin had made it oddly endearing. Heh. Ishin snorted quietly and kept drawing. Oh. I also want some spirals in it too. Nejire held her palm up, releasing a small burst of her wave motion, showing up as a small yellow spiral coming out from her palms. Your quirk still makes no sense to me, Ishin mused, watching it. While Ishin's teleportation may not make sense to most people, it in essence allowed events to happen through mathematical calculations that were merely processed through his personal reality to make the calculation into reality. So Ishin's teleportation at its core was purely physics-based. Of course, Ishin did try to explain, but Nejire was a little too smooth-minded to understand. Wave motion, though, even if it was more logical than most emitter quirks, the energy conversion from energy to power baffled him. Nejire's wave motion basically used her vitality in order to disperse blast waves throughout any point on her body. It was just that Nejire habitually dispersed it from her palms or the soles of her feet. Her blast wave was basically on the same concept of creating a pressure disturbance only within the spiral that Nejire produced. Ishin didn't know why the speed of the blast wave was so slow, because blast waves were technically supposed to be supersonic, but as mentioned earlier, quirks made no sense. The only consistent thing Ishin had noticed was that the energy naturally formed spirals. Ishin theorized that it was just how the thing that made up that energy blast naturally expelled itself in a spiral. And the fuel that Nejire had told him that her quirk used could only realistically be ADP, or adenosine triphosphate, the compound which gave humans energy. It could be seen that Nejire was similar to a battery, with the charge being ADP. The less of her quirk she used, the slower the energy was used. If she bottomed out like any normal person who had no ADP, her cells would cease to function, which would result in death. Ishin didn't want to see Nejire die. So being able to replenish her energy at all times was necessary. As he began sketching spiral-shaped support gear concepts in the margins, Nejire leaned over. Shunchan, you can make support gear too? With enough time, even a monkey can type Hamlet, Ishin replied. What does that mean? It means that with infinite time I can theoretically do anything. Oh. Nejire nodded seriously. That makes sense. She definitely didn't understand. Then she brightened again. Hey. We should think about your hero costume too. Why? Ishin asked flatly. There's still like 5 years until high school. Nejire just poked his cheek. Obviously, she said, smiling, so we can match. Chapter 38, Pre-Adolescence 13. So we can match, huh? Ishin hummed. Yeah. Aren't we going to be a 2-person team? Nejire nodded excitedly. You promised? I guess we can come up with some ideas then, Ishin relented. But only after we finish your costume first. Nejire nodded quickly, smiling the whole time. Okay. Hey. Shunkin-kun. Toru asked during lunch, peering at Ishin's notebook. Who's this girl? She pointed at one of his drafts of Nejire in costume. Ishin already had the boring T-pose version fully mapped out in his head. Since Nejire probably wouldn't want to see herself standing stiffly like a mannequin, he'd drawn her in a dynamic pose instead mid-flight, hair trailing behind her. It's the friend I was telling you about, Ishin replied, taking a bite of his lunch. Is she trying to be a hero? Toru asked. Yeah. She's already in middle school, Ishin said. Then, are you going to try to be a hero too? Toru asked offhandedly, her eyes drifting to the notes about Nejire's support gear. Ishin had written everything down in simple terms so Nejire could understand it. As a result, even Toru could easily follow how each piece of equipment worked. Toru was good at reading the room and picking up on social cues, so it was no surprise that despite being a transfer student, she became friends with the girls in her class almost immediately. She also wanted to enroll in UA and become a hero, but compared to some of the other girls, whose quirks were more obviously combat-oriented and were more flashy, Toru found it awkward to openly say so. That awareness was what separated Toru from Nejire. Toru naturally considered how others might see her and adjusted herself accordingly. Nejire, on the other hand, didn't have much awareness of that sort of thing, at least not until Ishin pointed it out. Even then, she mostly acted on her own feelings and Ishin's advice. Still, Toru felt like Ishin simply didn't care whether she had dreams of her own. That intuition wasn't wrong. Ishin disliked gossip and rarely talked enough with anyone to even start it. He barely ever pried and didn't feel the need to comment on things that weren't directly put in front of him. Well, I guess so. Ishin shrugged, taking a sip of his miso soup. Then, Toru hesitated again. Would it be weird to want to be a hero? Toru wasn't sure why, but looking at Ishin's plain expression, like nothing she said would change how he saw her, made her want to say what she honestly felt. It was the same feeling she'd had when she asked him what she looked like. No. Ishin shook his head immediately. Heroes are undeniably popular in children's entertainment. It's only natural for kids to want to become one. Aren't you also a kid? Toru thought, but she continued. But isn't it weird to only have invisibility and still want to be a hero? Instead of reassurance, Ishin's blunt, matter-of-fact answer only made Toru feel more confused, like she'd been overthinking the problem from the start. He did it often, making her doubt the worries she'd built up in her head with a common-sense bomb. Then let me ask you this, Ishin said. Why do you want to become a hero? It was a question that could be hard or easy, depending on the person. Regardless of whether it was reasonable or not, it was still a question with an answer. Toru hesitated before answering. Because it's cool? Is that really the reason? I don't know, Toru admitted, fidgeting with her sleeves. I guess it's weird that I want to be a hero without having a real reason. Ishin shook his head. It's not weird. People do things without a reason all the time. Though I don't know why I'm giving such a philosophical lesson to a kid when I don't even have much of a reason to be a hero either. You might not get this yet, Hagakure, Ishin continued, but sometimes the choices you make without a reason end up being the most meaningful ones. Maybe he was talking about himself too. He raised an apple and took a bite before finishing his thought. If you want to be a hero, then be one, Ishin shrugged. Who cares if people think it's weird? Just don't give up halfway. Toru paused, letting his words sink in. I guess you're right? I know I'm right. A tick mark practically appeared on Toru's face. What a mood killer. She went back to eating, lost in thought. Nizu studied the screen thoughtfully. I seem to have overlooked a crucial issue due to my enthusiasm. He had been sidetracked by the existence of such a powerful spatial-type quirk user, subconsciously linking the Muzutafu vigilante activities and the Sky Egg stasis incident to the same individual. Statistically, it was extremely unlikely for two spatial-type quirk users with such exaggerated capabilities to appear so close together in time. His instincts had made the connection automatically. That didn't mean it was impossible. Still, if the method by narrowing down suspects by comparing the people within each area didn't come out to anything, it wasn't too bad. While the existence of two overpowered spatial-type quirks would be troublesome, Nizu believed that even if it was possible, it was unlikely. However, the most important thing Nizu hadn't considered was how to convince this student to do anything at all. Blink's quirk registration obviously would contain no mention of teleportation, otherwise this investigation would have ended in a single day. Which meant either teleportation was only a sub-aspect of his quirk, or he could use it well enough to mimic other abilities and had deliberately registered false information. Identifying the culprit behind the Sky Egg stasis incident and the Muzutafu vigilante was only a matter of time. But there was a different issue entirely. How were they supposed to catch him doing anything? The culprit could simply deny involvement, and without concrete evidence beyond vague circumstantial details like location overlap and quirk similarity, it wouldn't be enough to justify an arrest. That meant that Nizu couldn't just kindly convince them to go to UA and be a hero. Catching them on camera was just as unlikely. Might as well identify them first and decide what to do after. If the student was engaging in vigilantism, then deep down, they probably wanted to be a hero, didn't they? Chapter 39, Pre-Adolescence 14. As the bell rang to signal the end of school, Ishin started to stand, only to be stopped by Toru. Shunkin-kun. Yeah. Do you really think I can be a hero? Ishin paused, then sighed internally. She already asked me this earlier. Still, he nodded. I mean, if she was able to get into Class 1A in the original story, then nothing's stopping her. Yeah. Why? Nothing. Just wanted to ask. Toru smiled faintly, then added, Are you going to try and be a hero? HM? Obviously. Ishin tilted his head. Are you still doubting yourself? He raised an eyebrow. Toru fell quiet. Even without seeing her face, Ishin could tell she was hesitating. What's with all this overthinking? Aren't you only in 5th grade? He exhaled. Then don't believe in yourself, Hagakure. Huh. Toru tilted her head, confused. Then what was all that stuff you said earlier supposed to mean? Believe in the me that believes in you, Ishin said flatly. After all, I'm the strongest. Toru froze, then raised a hand to her mouth. Pfft, what's that supposed to mean? She giggled. The strongest is obviously all might. Sure. Ishin shrugged and grabbed his backpack. Either way, I don't like answering the same question twice, so don't ask again. Thanks, Shunkin-kun, Toru mumbled. No problem. See you. MHM. See you tomorrow. Enough time has passed. Just kidding. Only a few weeks passed. Ishin hung his backpack on the hook beside his desk. Good morning. Mornin', Shunkin-kun. Ever since that conversation, Toru seemed a little more confident. At least she didn't seem to be embarrassed to tell her dreams to her friends from what Ishin could tell. It was good that she seemed a little happier. Ishin didn't know when he developed a soft spot for energetic people, but seeing Toru like this wasn't bad. As he sat down, he immediately winced. This was a mistake. It had been a while since Ishin had exercised seriously. Part of it was because he hated working out. The other part was because Nejire was way too enthusiastic about it. Recently, she'd started hounding him non-stop to train again, and after enough pestering, Ishin agreed. Since there weren't any places nearby to learn at Nejire's place, and signing up for another felt like a waste of money, Ishin just decided to just leave working out to themselves. He already had enough knowledge of anatomy and science to get a sports science degree, so it wasn't like they were going to get hurt accidentally. He'd even learned a new skill after a few days of experimenting. Artificially creating micro-tears in his muscles so he could technically get stronger muscles without ever exercising. Naturally, Ishin preferred that method. Nejire, on the other hand, absolutely did not. Rather, unlike Ishin, who was fine just not being fat enough to not hate himself, Nejire's entire quirk was based on her stamina and energy. Ishin, who couldn't even zoom enough to see let alone manipulate atoms yet, couldn't artificially increase Nejire's ADP count. So instead, came running, cardio, and an egregious amount of laps. And Nejire, being Nejire, refused to train without her promised partner. Thanks to the influence of her new friends, she'd also started coming up with increasingly dramatic ways to call for him. Her current favorite was, I choose you, Shunchan. Ishin didn't lie to Nejire for no reason, so when Nejire asked the best way to build stamina, Ishin naturally delivered. He regretted it deeply. I fucking hate cardio. Ishin inwardly cursed, massaging his calves under the desk. You okay, Shunkin-kun? Toru asked, watching him. No. I am currently in excruciating pain. Ishin replied evenly. Of course I'm in pain. You're not blind, are you? Hey. I was just trying to be nice. Toru crossed her arms in indignation. Is that so? Then I apologize. Ishin bowed to Toru in apology. You don't have to be that serious about it. Then I take my apology back. Ishin straightened up, getting comfortable in his seat, so he wasn't in a position where his ass was hurting every second. Huh? Toru blinked in confusion at the sudden change in tone, before realizing that Ishin was playing her the entire time. What's that supposed to mean? Toru slammed her desk in frustration. The two girls sitting in front of them glanced back, then immediately turned around once they realized it was just the usual. After a few weeks of interaction, Ishin had learned one thing: Toru's reactions were very entertaining. From Toru's perspective, being friends with Ishin was both fun and extremely annoying at the same time. So why are you sore? Wait, don't answer that. Toru stopped herself, eyeing Ishin's expression. Rather, Toru had already asked this question multiple times before. It was just a habit to ask why. You were exercising again. Wait, don't answer that either. She thought hard, trying to avoid another obvious comeback. Then her face lit up. You're totally doomed. We have PE today. She crossed her arms smugly. Says the person who wants to be a hero and hasn't trained at all yet other than PE. That wiped the smug look right off Toru. Ishin could see heat rising to her face. I mean. Ring. Toru visibly relaxed in relief. Ishin leaned closer and whispered, You know I can still see you, right? She turned toward him and shot him a very unthreatening glare. Stop dodging. Toru shouted, lunging at Ishin and aiming straight for his sore muscles. Why would I? Ishin replied, sidestepping easily. How are you dodging so perfectly? Toru complained after trying again. Math. KGH. Toru grit her teeth before trying again, but before she could move she was called out. Hagakure? Are you messing around again? The P.E teacher shouted, which got Toru to stiffen. Ishin of course made it worse. You know, for someone who's invisible you sure get caught a lot. Her face heated up. Then. Ishin froze, cursing internally. I'm cooked. All right. Partner up with your seatmate, the teacher clapped. We're stretching before we run laps. Toru's expression immediately brightened. She completely forgot about the stretching. Stretching meant contact. She walked up to Ishin and placed a hand on his shoulder. Mercy. Toru smiled. Not a chance. Chapter 40, Pre-Adolescence 15. Hey Shunkin-kun. Toru poked Ishin's shoulder. I will have vengeance, Ishin muttered, massaging his calves after the stretching session. What? Do you train with your friend every day? Unfortunately, yes. Ishin raised an eyebrow. Why? Are you finally going to lock in? Toru looked away awkwardly. Maybe. Good for you. Ishin started jogging and Toru quickly matched his pace. So, Shunkin-kun, Toru said after a moment, would you say you're pretty experienced with exercising? After all, her quirk didn't boost her stamina or strength in any way. If Ishin had been training for this long, then he had to know what he was doing, right? She had to keep up somehow. I'd say so. Ishin had a bad feeling about this. Then, Toru clasped her hands together in a pleading gesture. Please teach me your ways, Shursho. Ishin shot her a look. Huh? You heard me. Shursho. Toru said, eyes sparkling with excitement. What are you even yapping about? Ishin sighed. I never agreed to anything. I'm a busy man. Didn't I say earlier that I train with a friend every day? Don't you have the power of math? Toru shot back. You said it was all-powerful. When I said, Are you a liar, Shursho? Toru smirked, clearly thinking she had him cornered. Why is this girl calling me Shursho when I haven't even agreed to anything? Ishin couldn't help but feel a bit incredulous. Also, is she trying to rage bait me? Rage bait at that level doesn't work on me, Ishin said flatly after a brief pause. Darn. Toru pouted. Is there really no way, Shursho? And don't call me that. Why not, Shursho? Toru tilted her head, putting on an exaggeratedly innocent expression. Ishin glanced at Toru, pausing for a moment before sighing. I can't do it for free. Really? Toru's face lit up, then she hesitated. What do you need, Shursho? He hadn't thought this through. How about 50% of all your future earnings? Even I know that's a horrible deal, Shursho, Toru said immediately. Smarter than I thought. Ishin nodded. What's that supposed to mean? Toru pouted, clenching her fists and waving them in front of him. I said what I said. Ishin shrugged, then continued before she could fire back. Fine. Then get me ice cream once a week. Ice cream? Toru blinked. Shursho, you like sweet things? This was the first she'd heard of that. Ishin nodded once. Toru thought it over for a few seconds then grinned. Okay. So when do we start Shursho? Tomorrow morning. I regret everything. Toru was on her knees, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down from her invisible neck. Well, unfortunately it's too late to regret it now, Ishin said, sitting down on a nearby swing with ice cream in hand. He raised his hand then lowered a finger. I asked your parents and they enthusiastically agreed. Actually, they were practically begging me to make you exercise. He lowered another finger, taking a bite of his blueberry ice cream. I know your address, so I can just wait for you outside. Another finger lowered. When I said I might be able to help with your invisibility, you were one of the most enthusiastic people I'd ever seen. Another finger lowered. Now your parents are the ones paying for my ice cream, and I am many things, but I am not a scammer. Ishin paused on his pinky in thought, then nodded and lowered it without another reason. Toru noticed immediately. Hey, why'd you lower that last finger without saying anything? She pointed at him indignantly. Also, don't you think it's a little weird that I'm the only one working out? For the past week and a half, Ishin had come to her house and dragged Toru out to exercise. School started at 8:30 a.m., and Ishin showed up around 6 every morning to work her out for about an hour, then gave her time to wash up and eat before they walked to school together. Toru lived pretty close by and she didn't really have anyone to walk to school with, so she'd originally been fine with the arrangement. It was just a little embarrassing how enthusiastic her parents were about her exercising. It wasn't like she was fat or anything, thank you very much. She was just a bit lazier at home than most. And Ishin's proposal to try and help her become visible was far too tempting to refuse. Toru didn't know how he planned to do it, but with his so-called omnipotent math quirk and the fact that he was the only person she knew who could see her, there was hope. She wasn't as desperate as she used to be, but it still wasn't something she could simply ignore. After all, it was something important to her. Hagakure Toru had always been an overthinker. After Ishin's conversation about becoming heroes, Toru had gone home that day with a question stuck in her head. Why did she want to become a hero? Ishin had said that sometimes you didn't need a reason. But Toru could feel it. She had a reason that she couldn't just put into words. His words stuck with her, but instinctively she knew they didn't apply to her. On her way home the day of the conversation, she heard laughter and overlapping conversations. She glanced toward the sound and saw a group of high schoolers crowding around a particularly beautiful girl, all of them clearly focused on her. Toru looked away. Then something else caught her eye. An advertisement. Uwabami filled the screen, promoting a new skin cream. Toru stared at it, dazed, then looked down at her phone. Because it used Face ID, the screen stayed pitch black, despite her looking straight at it. The black screen reflected nothing back. She opened her images and scrolled through an entire album of Ishin's drawings of her. In every one she looked happy, energetic, expressive, and was always aware of the artist's attention. Yet Toru couldn't feel happy like the girl in the drawings. Why? Is she not me? What makes her and me so different? The thought followed her all the way home. When she arrived, her mom greeted her from the kitchen, wearing skin-tight gloves as she cooked so she wouldn't accidentally burn herself because of her own invisibility. Welcome back. I'm back. Toru lingered a moment longer than usual, staring at her mom. After a few minutes, her mom finally noticed she hadn't gone upstairs yet. Hungry, Toru-chan? And no snacks before dinner, I've said this already, she added with a teasing tone. Toru shook her head. No. Just thinking about something. Need advice? Her mom asked. No. Just something I was talking about with a friend. What kind of friend? Someone who's kind of annoying, Toru said, then added quietly, but a kind person. Well, that reassures your mom. She smiled. Don't forget to wash up before dinner. Tonight's shagiyaki. Okay. After that, Toru went to her room and shut the door. She stepped in front of the mirror. There was nothing there. She tried to smile the way Ishin had drawn her. But she just couldn't see it. She couldn't see anything. Is this what he meant? Her thoughts drifted back to their conversation earlier that day. Why do you want to become a hero? Because it's cool? Is that really the reason? She hadn't been able to answer then. Toru stared into the mirror, reflecting an empty uniform. A single wish surfaced. Something so small yet impossible to ignore. I want to be seen.